Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto Summon in the game system and at every level got hot girl of DXD. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Player and the Princess. The world ended in a storm of white light and black truth-seeking rods. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was the only end that ever made sense. He felt the ferocious, divine power of Kaguya Otsutsuki tearing at the very fabric of their dimension, a chaotic energy that threatened to unmake everything. Beside him, Sasuke was a pillar of dark lightning, his Rinnegan spinning with cosmic fury. Sakura, a force of nature in her own right, poured every ounce of her life into their final gambit. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. He saw the opening, a flicker of a moment, a breath between heartbeats, as the rabid goddess shifted her focus to Sasuke. It was a chance born of desperation. His own reserves were screaming deserts, the Nine Tails chakra a guttering ember within him. But there was still his life. One last, brilliant flare. Sasuke, he roared, and the name was both a command and a farewell. His rival's eyes, one a star, one a vortex, snapped to his. Understanding passed between them, a silent conversation honed over a lifetime of conflict and camaraderie. Now, Naruto surged forward, no longer a shinobi but a living Rasengan of will and sacrifice. He poured everything he was, the loneliness of his childhood, the warmth of Ichiraku ramen, the weight of Jiraiya's hand on his shoulder, the promise he'd made to Nagato, into his fist. He wasn't aiming to defeat her. He was aiming to become the lock. The final seal. Kaguya's eyes widened. She was a god, but even gods could be surprised by the sheer, stubborn foolishness of a mortal willing to burn himself to ash. He felt her power impale him, 1,000 lances of bone and energy shredding his very soul. But he held on, his hand clamping down on her, the seal formula he'd learned in a frantic moment flaring across his skin. The world dissolved into agonizing, blinding white. He heard Sakura scream his name. He felt Sasuke's chakra, a final, desperate surge trying to pull him back. But he was already gone. An anchor sinking into an ocean of light. I kept my promise, everyone. Then, nothing, or rather, a new kind of nothing. The searing pain was gone, replaced by a profound, absolute cold. Light faded to a darkness so complete it felt solid. He had no body, no breath, no thoughts beyond a lingering echo of his own name. He was adrift. This, he presumed, was death. It was quieter than he'd expected. A single point of azure light pierced the void. It expanded, forming clean, sharp lines of text that burned themselves into his consciousness. They felt alien, sterile, utterly devoid of the warmth of chakra or the coldness of malice. Soul remnant detected. Condition: viable. Source world designation: SH-077. Threat level: extinguished. Host body: reconstructing from soul data. Acceptable. Commencing transference protocol. Welcome, player. The words made no sense, but the sensation that followed was unmistakable. It was the feeling of being pulled, stretched, and violently reshaped. The quiet darkness shattered into a million screaming shards of data and light. He felt the phantom agony of bones knitting, muscles weaving, and a heart kicking into a sudden, frantic rhythm. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He gasped, a raw, ragged sound, and the air that filled his lungs was wrong. It was thin and carried the metallic, cloying scent of decay. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling. He was lying on a bed of dead leaves, their colors bleached to a uniform, sickly gray. He was in a forest, but it was unlike any he had ever seen. The trees were skeletal, their branches brittle and black, clawing at a sky the color of old parchment. There was no birdsong, no buzz of insects, no rustle of animals in the undergrowth. There was only a profound and unsettling silence. A quiet so deep it felt like a pressure against his eardrums. He checked his body. He was solid, real. The tattered remains of his battle gear hung from his frame. His pouches were empty, his kunai and scrolls gone. He reached inward, searching for that familiar, roaring ocean of chakra. He found a puddle, a shallow, murky pool that barely responded to his touch. Inside him, Kurama was a dormant, slumbering weight. His own immense energy focused entirely on a slow, agonizing process of healing. They were alive, but only just. Where am I? The afterlife. Some kind of genjutsu. He bit his thumb. The sharp tang of his own blood a familiar anchor. He flowed through the hand signs for a dispel. Nothing happened. The dead forest remained. Then, the blue text appeared again, hovering in the corner of his vision like a ghost. It was translucent, unobtrusive, but utterly undeniable. Player. Naruto Uzumaki, level 0, status, critical. Chakra reserves at 3%. Physical stamina at 8%. Objective. Survive. He stared at the words. His mind reeling. Player. Level. This was no illusion. It was something else, something terrifyingly new. He tried to swat the text away, but his hand passed through it. It was part of his sight now. An unwelcome passenger behind his eyes. A low growl cut through the oppressive silence. Naruto's head snapped up. His senses, blunted by exhaustion, screamed a warning. From the shadows between the skeletal trees, shapes began to emerge. At first, he thought they were wolves, but the thought died as they stepped into the dim light. They were canine in form, their matted fur was the color of ash, and jagged, bone-like ridges protruded from their spines. Their paws made no sound on the dead leaves. But the worst part was their eyes, empty, black pits. Chi seemed to absorb the light around them. And the silence, it was coming from them. It wasn't just a lack of sound. It was an aura, an active, tangible field of null energy that sought to deaden the world. He felt it press against his skin, trying to snuff out the flickering flame of his own life force. The system's text updated. New quest issued. Survive the hunt. Enemies detected. Brawler X5. One of the creatures lunged, its maw snapping open to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Naruto moved on pure instinct. He threw himself to the side, rolling over the dry earth, his body screaming in protest. He was slow, sluggish. The brawler's claws raked across his back, tearing through the fabric and drawing blood. Pain, sharp and immediate, cut through his confusion. There was no time to think, only to act. He pushed off the ground, putting a gnarled tree trunk between himself and the pack. They circled him, their movements unnervingly silent and coordinated. They weren't just beasts, they were predators. And they knew he was wounded. Okay, Naruto, assess. 5 of them. I'm almost out of chakra. Taijutsu is my best bet, but I'm in no shape for a prolonged fight. He formed a familiar cross seal with his fingers, concentrating what little chakra he could muster. Shadow clone jutsu. There was a weak puff of smoke. A single clone, flickering and unstable, appeared beside him. The brawlers paused for a split second, their dead eyes flicking between the two figures. It was all the time he needed. Go, he grunted. The clone shot to the left, a deliberate, obvious feint. 3 of the brawlers instantly gave chase. The real Naruto exploded to the right, a salvaged kunai, cracked and dull, but better than nothing, appearing in his hand. He slammed into the nearest brawler, driving the blade deep into its neck. The creature gave a choked, soundless snarl and collapsed. But the other one was already on him. It rammed into his side, sending him staggering. Its jaws snapped shut on his arm, the teeth piercing flesh. He yelled, a raw sound of pain, and drove his elbow down hard on the creature's skull. It released him, shaking its head, and he scrambled back. The other 3 had already torn his clone to shreds. The puff of smoke its only testament. Now they were bounding back toward him, their empty eyes locked on his. He was cornered. No, I didn't survive a war against a goddess to die to a pack of mangy dogs in a dead forest. A fire ignited in the pit of his stomach. A familiar, defiant warmth. He cupped his right hand, pouring the last dregs of his chakra, the very dregs of his will, into that single point. The air began to churn, a high-pitched grinding sound that was a violation in the crushing silence. A swirling, chaotic sphere of blue energy formed in his palm. It was smaller than usual, unstable and spitting sparks, but it was a Rasengan. The brawler Alpha, larger than the rest, leapt for his throat. Take this, Naruto roared, thrusting his hand forward. He didn't just push the Rasengan into the beast. He slammed it, shoving all his weight and desperation behind it. The impact was cataclysmic. The sphere of chakra drilled into the Grawler's chest, and for a moment, there was no sound at all. Then, with a deafening implosion of energy, the creature was simply gone. A spray of black dust and a shockwave that sent the remaining 2 Grawlers tumbling back was all that remained. They stared at the spot where their leader had been, then at Naruto, who stood panting, his arm dropping to his side, his vision swimming with black spots. A flicker of something, not fear, but perhaps instinctual caution, entered their dead eyes. With a final, silent snarl, they turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. Naruto fell to one knee, his chest heaving. He'd won, but it had cost him everything. He had nothing left. The blue text flickered back into life. Threat neutralized. Experience points gained. 100. Level up. Player. Naruto Uzumaki. Level 1. A strange warmth flooded his body, soothing the deep ache in his muscles and knitting the gashes on his back and arm. His chakra reserves swelled slightly, from a puddle to a small pond. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. He felt a sliver of Kurama's consciousness stir, a low rumble of exhausted approval in the back of his mind. Level up. Experience points. It felt so cold, so transactional. A life or death battle reduced to numbers in a game he didn't understand. Level 1 milestone achieved. Unlocking unique system skill. Peerage summoning. Warning. Summoning is an irreversible, binding action. Initiating first summon. Before Naruto could even process the words, the ground in front of him began to glow. A deep, crimson light bled from the dead soil, and intricate arcane lines etched themselves into the earth, forming a complex circle filled with symbols he had never seen before. It was not a shinobi sealing array, it was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful. The air grew thick, smelling of ozone and something faintly sweet, like exotic flowers. The light intensified, forcing him to shield his eyes. A pillar of crimson energy. Y erupted from the circle with a sound like a tolling bell. When the light faded, a figure stood in the center of the now fading circle. It was a girl, perhaps a year or 2 older than him. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with a figure that could start wars and a face of aristocratic perfection. But it was her hair that seized his attention. It was a shade of crimson so deep and vibrant it seemed to drink the meager light from the sky, cascading down her back in a silken river. She was dressed in a strange but formal uniform, a blazer, a shirt, and a skirt, that was utterly out of place in the dead wilderness. Her expression was one of pure, disoriented fury. Her blue-green eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the dead forest, then landed on him, kneeling and bloodied on the ground. "You," she said, her voice a commanding alto that held no room for argument. "Where am I? What is this place? And who in the 9 hells are you to have summoned me?" Naruto, still on one knee and utterly drained, could only stare. "Summoned you, lady? I was just trying not to get eaten. I could ask you the same thing. You're the one who just appeared in a light show." The girl's eyes narrowed. A palpable aura of power, dense and heavy like velvet, rolled off her. It wasn't chakra, it was something foreign, something dark and potent. "Do not play games with me. I am Rias Grimori, heiress to the house of Grimori. An act of summoning like this is a declaration. State your purpose before I eradicate you." Naruto pushed himself to his feet, a spark of his old defiance overriding his exhaustion. He'd faced down gods and monsters. He wasn't about to be intimidated by an arrogant princess, no matter how powerful she felt. "Look, heiress, I don't know who you are, and I don't care. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm just as lost as you are." A low growl, deeper and more menacing than any before, echoed from the trees behind Rias. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Rias spun around. Naruto's eyes widened. It was another Grawler, but this one dwarfed the others. It was the size of a small house, its frame more massive, the bone-like armor on its back thicker. This was no mere alpha. This was a patriarch. The oppressive aura of silence it projected was so intense it made Naruto's head spin. It had been drawn by the massive energy release of the summoning. "What is that thing?" Rias demanded, her aristocratic composure momentarily cracking. "Dinner, if we don't move," Naruto grunted, instinctively falling into a low combat stance. "And it looks like we're the main course." The giant Grawler opened its mouth. And instead of a roar, A wave of pure silence washed over them, a concussive force that felt like it was trying to snuff out their very souls. Rias snarled, her momentary shock replaced by furious resolve. Insolent beast. She raised her hand, and a sphere of black and crimson energy, crackling with raw power, coalesced in her palm. Naruto felt the sheer destructive force contained within it and flinched. What is that power? It doesn't create or transform, it just erases. Stand back, she commanded. No chance. Naruto shot back, creating 2 new shadow clones. We don't know what it can do. Distraction first. Before Rias could argue, his clones zipped off in opposite directions, drawing the monster's attention. It swiped a massive claw, and 1 clone vanished in a puff of smoke. I don't need your help, Blondie. Rias snapped, but she took the opening he'd created. She launched the sphere of energy. It streaked across the clearing and slammed into the Growler's shoulder. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. There was no explosion, no impact. The flesh, bone, and armor simply ceased to exist, leaving a perfectly round, cauterized hole in the creature's side. The Growler gave a shuddering, silent scream of agony. It ignored the remaining clone and fixed its hateful, empty eyes on Rias. It charged, its immense weight making the ground quake. Idiot, you just made it mad. Naruto yelled. He moved, weaving between its stomping legs. He was small, fast, a nuisance. He leapt onto its back, a normal kunai gripped in his hand, and drove it into a gap in the creature's bone armor. It was like stabbing solid rock. The blade snapped. The Growler bucked, trying to throw him off. Rias, seeing another opening, prepared a second blast. Don't, you'll hit me, Naruto shouted. A necessary sacrifice, she retorted, though a flicker of hesitation crossed her face. Like hell, he formed another Rasengan, this one even smaller and more desperate than the last. He poured the last of his newly regained energy into it. Aim for the head. When I say now, he ran up the creature's spine, a blur of orange and black against its ashen hide. Rias tracked his movement, her own crimson power gathering around her. Their timing was off, their styles a chaotic mess, but they were both seasoned fighters. Now, Naruto roared as he reached the base of its skull. He thrust his Rasengan down at the same moment Rias unleashed a concentrated beam of her power of destruction. The 2 attacks converged on the Growler's head. Blue and crimson energy slammed together in a violent, unstable fusion. The swirling chakra of the Rasengan tore at reality, while the crimson power of destruction unmade it. The resulting explosion was neither and both, a chaos. Icy vortex that ripped the Growler's head from its shoulders and vaporized it into nothingness. The massive body crashed to the ground, its fall shaking the entire forest. Naruto was thrown clear, landing hard in the dirt. He lay there, gasping for air, every muscle burning. The silence from the Growler was gone, replaced by the ringing in his ears. High on a distant ridge, concealed by the gnarled trees, a figure clad in silver-green armor lowered a crystalline scrying orb. The scout's face was hidden behind a visored helmet, but his posture was rigid with shock. He had seen the boy with the golden chakra fight. He had witnessed the summoning of the crimson-haired demoness. And he had just watched them, together, unleash a power that defied all known laws of magic. He tapped a rune on his vambrace, sending a silent, encrypted message. Anomaly confirmed. Threat level. Amber. A player has arrived. Then, he was gone, melting into the woods as if he were never there. Down in the clearing, Naruto pushed himself up. Rias stood a few feet away, her chest rising and falling slightly, a smudge of dirt on her perfect cheek. The crimson glow in her hand faded. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind an awkward, heavy silence. They had survived, together. Naruto broke the silence first, a wry, exhausted grin tugging at his lips. See, necessary sacrifice wasn't so necessary. Rias Grimori looked at the blonde boy. His clothes in tatters, covered in blood and grime, yet standing with an unbreakable spine. A flicker of grudging respect entered her eyes. Don't get cocky, she said, her voice retaining its aristocratic edge, but lacking its earlier bite. You were merely a convenient distraction. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the dead forest and the darkening sky. So, Naruto Uzumaki, it would seem we are stuck with each other, for now. He nodded, his grin fading as the grim reality of their situation settled in. They were trapped in a dying world, guided by a cryptic system, and hunted by silent monsters. And they were all each other had. Yeah, he said, his voice low. It would seem so. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Siege of Oakhaven. Walking with Rias Grimori was an exercise in contrasts. She moved with an innate, unshakable grace, her posture perfect, her steps measured, as if she were strolling through a royal garden rather than a forest of the dead. Even the hem of her strange uniform now frayed and stained, she projected an aura of absolute authority. Naruto, by comparison, felt like a stray dog. He loped along, his movements economical and born of a shinobi's need for silence. His senses constantly scanning their surroundings, his tattered orange jacket a garish splash of color against the monochrome landscape. Their conversation was a careful dance of interrogation. So, this system, Rias began, her tone analytical as she watched the translucent blue text flicker in her own vision, a feature that had appeared for her the moment the Patriarch Brawler fell. It designates you as the player, and me as a peerage member. An insulting and entirely unacceptable hierarchy. Naruto shrugged, kicking a gray stone from their path. Beats being dead. You got a better explanation for what's happening. 'Cause I'm all ears. My family are masters of demonic magic and ancient contracts, she stated, a hint of pride in her voice. This feels different, colder. It lacks the ritual, the exchange of will. It's an imposition, not an agreement. Tell me about it, he muttered. One minute I'm saving my world, the next I'm here getting graded on my ability to not get eaten. What about you? What were you doing before you got zapped here? A shadow passed over her face, so fleeting he almost missed it. I was attending to a family matter. A tiresome political engagement I had no interest in. She dismissed the topic with a wave of her hand. More importantly, your abilities. You call it chakra. You create tangible copies of yourself. And form spheres of destructive energy. You are clearly a trained warrior, yet your technique is raw, unrefined. Naruto bristled. Hey, my technique got us out of that fight. And what about you? That red and black stuff. You just point and things disappear. That's not exactly refined, either. That, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr, is the power of destruction, the signature magic of the House of Baal. Inherited by the Grimori line. It is the power to extinguish anything. It is precise, absolute, and far beyond your comprehension. Right, splody magic. Got it. Her eyes flashed with annoyance. But she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she fell silent, a thoughtful frown on her lips. They walked on, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps on the brittle leaves and the faint, ever-present hum of the dead world. Naruto found the silence unnerving. He was used to the vibrant life of the forests around Konoha. This place felt like a grave. He broke the quiet again. Look, I don't like this any more than you do. But we're stuck here. We can either keep poking each other to see what pops, or we can work together until we figure out what's going on. Rias glanced at him, her expression unreadable, a pragmatic, if simplistic, assessment. Very well, Naruto Uzumaki. A temporary truce, until I can ascertain the nature of this system, and find a way back to my own world. Our goals are aligned. Good, he said, relieved. First goal. Find people. Find out what these Grawler things are and why this whole forest looks like it took a bath in ash. As if on cue, the oppressive canopy of skeletal trees began to thin. The gray light ahead of them grew brighter, and the cloying smell of decay was gradually replaced by the scent of wood smoke. Hope, AF, fragile and unfamiliar feeling in this bleak world, fluttered in Naruto's chest. They emerged from the treeline onto a low ridge, and Naruto's breath caught. Below them, nestled in a shallow valley, was a town. It wasn't a hidden village of shinobi or a grand metropolis. It was a simple, fortified town, surrounded by a high wall of rough-hewn timber. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, and a patchwork of barren fields surrounded it. It was the first sign of life they had seen. But it was a town under siege. A chaotic horde of creatures swarmed around the base of the wall. There were more Grawlers, their silent forms a terrifying tide of black, but they were accompanied by other monstrosities. Hulking, vaguely humanoid brutes with skin like cracked stone swung massive clubs against the main gate. Floating, wraith-like figures drifted near the top of the palisade, their ethereal claws tearing at the wooden ramparts. The silent aura they projected was a visible miasma, a shimmering wave of energy that seemed to drain the color and life from everything it touched. They were a legion of silence and entropy. The Silent Legion. On the walls, tiny figures moved, flashes of steel and the occasional spark of magic answering the assault. A volley of arrows rained down, most of them shattering harmlessly against the brutes' stony hides. The gate, reinforced with iron bands, was groaning, splintering under the relentless assault. The blue text in Naruto's vision updated. World event detected. The Siege of Oakhaven. The Silent Legion seeks to extinguish another bastion of life. Intervention is optional. Rias drew in a sharp breath beside him. By the Archdukes, they're being slaughtered. They're still fighting, Naruto said, his eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield with a practiced gaze. He saw the patterns, the weaknesses, the flow of the fight. The defenders were exhausted, their movements sluggish, but they were coordinated. They were soldiers, not just frightened villagers. But they were losing. The gate wouldn't hold for another hour. Rias turned to him, her expression grim. We cannot simply stand by. Wasn't planning on it, Naruto replied. He pointed. Those big ones are the muscle. They're focused on the gate. The floaty ones are suppressing the archers. The Grawlers are just waiting for a breach. They have a commander. Where? You don't see him, Naruto said, his eyes fixed on a spot behind the main assault force. But he's there. An army this organized doesn't just happen. They're being directed. If we take out the head, the body will fall apart. Rias's eyes lit up with a strategist's fire. A decapitation strike. Bold. I like it. I can obliterate their siege forces from here, draw their attention. No, Naruto countered immediately. That's what they'd expect. You'd be a giant red target. We need to be smarter. He looked at her, his gaze intense. I need you to trust me. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Her pride was a tangible thing. A shield she wore as surely as any armor. But she saw the fierce certainty in his blue eyes, the look of a commander who had led forces in a war she couldn't possibly imagine. She gave a curt, reluctant nod. What's your plan? Quote. A wide, feral grin spread across Naruto's face. Chaos. He bit his thumb and slammed his hand on the ground. Summoning jutsu. A plume of smoke erupted, far larger and more stable than his earlier attempts. When it cleared, Gamakichi, the swaggering son of the chief toad, stood there, looking profoundly unimpressed. Naruto. What the hell? This place smells awful, and my connection to the mountain feels weird. No time, Kichi. I need a ride and a distraction. Naruto leapt onto the toad's head. Rias stared, her jaw slightly agape, as the giant, pipe-smoking toad adjusted his tanto. You summon frogs. They're toads. And their family. Naruto yelled back. You wanted to be the distraction. Now's your chance. Hit them from the front. But don't get bogged down. Hit and run. Draw the big ones away from the gate. Gamakichi and I will handle the commander. Without waiting for a reply, he slapped the toad's head. Go. Gamakichi launched himself down the ridge in a series of ground-shaking leaps, landing right in the chaotic rear of the Silent Legion. Naruto, perched on his head, formed a cross-seal. Shadow clone jutsu. This time, bowls. Teared by his level up and the dregs of Kurama's healing, 24 clones burst into existence around him. All right, boys, let's get loud. The effect was immediate. The clones, each a perfect replica of Naruto, fanned out, yelling and causing as much havoc as possible. They were a sudden, unexpected cancer in the Legion's organized ranks. Rias watched for a split second, a look of stunned disbelief on her face, before a slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. So that's his game. Her body erupted in a torrent of crimson and black energy. Very well, Naruto Uzumaki. Let's see if your chaos can keep up with my destruction. She descended the ridge like a ruby meteor, landing gracefully at the edge of the battlefield. The soldiers on the wall, seeing the sudden eruption of fighting in the enemy's rear and the appearance of the crimson-haired goddess, let out a ragged, hopeful cheer. Beast of the Legion, face the wrath of the House of Grimori, Rias declared, her voice ringing with power. She thrust her hand forward, and a massive wave of destructive energy tore through the ranks of Grawlers, turning a swath of them to dust. It was a spectacular, terrifying display of power. Had immediately drew the attention of the hulking brutes at the gate. Two of them turned, abandoning their assault, and began to lumber towards her. It was working. The Legion's attention was divided. Meanwhile, Naruto and Gamakichi were a whirlwind of disruption. The real Naruto, eyes narrowed in concentration, scanned the field from his high vantage point. He ignored the lesser soldiers, searching for the core. "Where are you?" He found him. Standing on a slight rise, cloaked in shadows, was a figure taller than the rest, clad in jagged, black armor. It held no weapon, its hands clasped behind its back. It wasn't fighting, it was observing, directing the flow of battle with subtle, imperceptible gestures. There, Kichi, straight ahead, Gamakichi leapt, crushing brawlers under his feet. The clones engaged the Legion's flank, a chaotic mess of Rasengans and frantic taijutsu that kept them from reinforcing their commander. The armored figure finally turned its head, its helmet a featureless, obsidian plate. It had noticed him. It raised one hand, and a phalanx of elite brawlers, sleeker and more heavily armored than the others, moved to intercept. "My turn," Gamakichi grunted, drawing his massive sword. Toad blade beheading, he swung the tanto in a wide, whistling arc, cleaving through the elite guard. Naruto leapt from his head, two shadow clones peeling off with him. "We'll handle this. Go help Rias keep those brutes busy. Don't have to tell me twice." The Toad Sage bellowed, leaping away towards the front lines. Naruto and his clones landed before the commander. The creature, if it was a creature, was utterly still. The aura of silence emanating from it was so potent it felt like a physical weight. "You are not of this world," a voice rasped in Naruto's mind. It wasn't spoken, it was projected. A dry rustle of dead leaves. "Your sound is an anomaly. It must be corrected." "I've got your correction right here," Naruto snarled. He and his clones attacked. It was a perfectly executed three-pronged assault. The commander didn't move. Just as their fists were about to connect, an invisible barrier of pure silence erupted from its body, sending them flying backward. It was like punching a solid wall. Naruto skidded to a halt, his mind racing. Conventional attacks won't work. It's projecting that null field as armor. One clone charged again, handcuffed for a Rasengan. The commander raised its hand, and a lance of black, silent energy shot forth, impaling the clone. It dissipated without a sound, not even the usual puff of smoke. The power had erased it completely. Just like Rias's magic, a thunderous crash from the front lines drew his attention for a second. He saw Rias, a whirlwind of crimson, gracefully evading the clumsy swings of a stone-skinned brute while Gamakichi flanked another. Slashing at its legs, they were holding their own, but the sheer number of enemies was beginning to tell. The defenders on the wall had renewed their volley of arrows, emboldened by their new allies. He had to end this, now. "Okay. New plan," Naruto said to his remaining clone. He formed a new Rasengan, pouring a significant amount of his remaining chakra into it. The clone did the same. "You go high, I go low. It can't block both of us at once." It was a simple, brutish tactic, but it was all he had. They charged. The commander remained impassive. The clone leapt into the air, bringing its Rasengan down in a vertical arc. Naruto slid low, aiming for the commander's legs. Just as he'd predicted, the commander raised one hand to block the aerial assault. For a split second, its lower body was exposed. Naruto thrust his Rasengan forward. His attack connected. He felt the grinding, tearing power of his jutsu rip into the commander's leg. The black armor shattered, and for the first time, the creature staggered. But it was fast, impossibly fast. Its other hand, free from blocking the now dispelled clone, swung down in a vicious backhand. The blow caught Naruto square in the chest. It wasn't the physical force that hurt, it was the silent energy behind it. It felt like his own chakra was being snuffed out, his very life force extinguished. He flew backward, tumbling through the dirt, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He landed in a heap, his vision blurring, a coppery taste in his mouth. The commander, its leg mangled but already starting to reform, began to stalk towards him. "Your noise is fading, anomaly. Soon, there will be only silence." Naruto struggled to push himself up, his body refusing to obey. He was spent. Kurama was a deep, silent well. unable to offer even a drop more chakra. He had been reckless, pushing himself too hard, too fast. Is this it? After everything, he thought of his friends, of the world he'd died to protect. He thought of Rias, fighting with the pride of a queen on a battlefield that wasn't hers. He couldn't fail, not now. He dug his fingers into the dead earth, a primal roar tearing from his throat. It wasn't a cry of power, but of pure, unadulterated defiance. He forced himself to his knees, his eyes blazing with a fire that no silence could extinguish. I am not finished. And deep within him, something answered. It wasn't Kurama. It wasn't his own chakra. It was the system. Player has reached the limits of mortal endurance. Willpower stat exceeds threshold. Combat data processed. Experience points gained. 500. Level up. Player. Naruto Uzumaki. Level 2. A torrential flood of warm, restorative energy surged through him, more potent than the last time. His wounds sealed, his reserves of chakra refilled, brimming with a power that felt cleaner, stronger. A new strength settled into his bones. The commander paused, its head tilting slightly, as if confused by this sudden reversal. Naruto slowly got to his feet, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. Round 2. He vanished in a burst of speed that was double what it had been moments before. He appeared behind the commander, his hand already cupped. Giant Rasengan. The sphere of chakra that formed in his palm was immense, larger than his own torso, stable and thrumming with ferocious power. The commander spun, bringing its silent barrier up, but it was too slow. Naruto slammed the attack into its back. The impact was no longer silent. It was a deafening roar of sound and fury that shattered the oppressive null field. The commander's armor disintegrated, its body torn apart by the vortex of chakra. For a single, fleeting moment, Naruto saw the true form beneath the armor, a being of pure shadow and de-stitched together souls, before it was utterly annihilated. As the commander dissolved into black dust, a collective, psychic screech echoed across the battlefield. The remaining members of the Silent Legion froze. Their coordination vanished. The brutes bellowed in confusion, the wraiths wavered, and the Grawlers broke ranks, scurrying back towards the dead forest in a disorganized rout. The siege was broken. A cheer, a real, full-throated cheer of victory and disbelief, erupted from the walls of Oakhaven. Naruto stood in the center of the clearing, breathing heavily, the power of his level up still humming through him. He had won. The system's text appeared once more. Level 2 milestone achieved. Initiating second summon. Oh, not again, Naruto groaned. A new light, different from the first, tore through the sky. It was a searing bolt of purple lightning that struck the ground right next to him. It wasn't a gentle summoning circle, it was a violent, explosive arrival. The air crackled with ozone and the scent of rain. From the crater of scorched earth, another woman rose. She had long, flowing black hair tied in a ponytail, and a figure that was somehow even more voluptuous than Rias's. She wore the same kind of uniform, but hers was slightly open at the chest, revealing a tantalizing amount of cleavage. A gentle, almost serene smile was on her face, but her eyes, a mesmerizing shade of violet, held a spark of playful malice and immense power. She took in the scene, the broken battlefield, the retreating monsters, the victorious soldiers, and finally, Naruto, standing a few feet away. Covered in grime and looking utterly bewildered. Her smile widened. Era, she cooed, her voice a silky, seductive melody. It seems I've arrived just as the fun was ending. Did you make this big mess all by yourself? Before Naruto could form a coherent reply, Rias and Gamakichi arrived. The toad dismissed himself in a puff of smoke with a promise to have a long talk later. Rias, her face flushed with the thrill of battle, stopped dead when she saw the newcomer. Akeno, she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. The black-haired woman, Akeno, turned her gaze to Rias. Her smile never wavered, but a new, competitive glint entered her eyes. Hello, President, she said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. Fancy meeting you here, and with a new pet, I see. Her eyes raked over Naruto, a flicker of genuine interest in their depths. He's rather cute, when he's not covered in monster guts. Rias's jaw tightened. The easy camaraderie of the battlefield evaporated, replaced by a sudden, palpable tension that had nothing to do with the Silent Legion. Naruto looked between the two of them, the proud, crimson-haired princess and the smiling, seductive priestess of thunder, and felt a headache coming on that was worse than any injury he had sustained in the fight. His new life, it seemed, was only going to get more complicated. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Priestess of Thunder and the Moral Line. The town of Oakhaven treated them like gods. After the siege broke, the gates had swung open to a tide of cheering, weeping townsfolk. They were offered the best rooms at the inn. Their plates were never empty, and their gear was mended by the town's most skilled craftsmen. Naruto, unaccustomed to such open adoration, found it deeply unsettling. He was a hero, yes, but he was used to the grudging respect of his own village, earned over years of being treated as a pariah. This felt different, more fragile. The welcome also provided a stage for the new, complicated dynamic between his two companions. Rias, with her noble bearing, accepted the town's fealty as her natural due, offering gracious words and strategic advice to the town's shaken militia leader. Akeno, however, moved through the adulation like a playful phantom, her gentle smiles and teasing words earning the blush of every guardsman and the adoration of the children, while subtly positioning herself as the more approachable of the two otherworldly saviors. The tension simmered between them, a low-heat rivalry that Naruto found himself squarely in the middle of. Naruto, Rias would say, her voice crisp as she reviewed a map of the region with him. The road east leads toward the capital, Lyria. It is our most logical destination if we are to find answers. Akeno would interject, appearing at his side with a tray of tea. But the western road is so much more scenic, don't you think? We might find a lovely hot spring. She'd lean in close, her breath warm against his ear. I could scrub your back for you. You must be so sore after that battle. Naruto would feel Rias's gaze sharpen, her demonic energy flickering almost imperceptibly, and he'd quickly find an excuse to go check on the town's walls. After 2 days of rest and resupply, they took the eastern road. Rias had won the strategic argument, but Akeno seemed to have won the battle of attrition. Walking beside Naruto while Rias was forced into a conversation with the militia captain who was escorting them for the first few miles. You mustn't mind the president, Akeno said, her voice a low murmur. She's always been rather possessive. It's how she shows she cares. Possessive? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. We've known each other for all of 3 days. For some people, that's a lifetime. Akeno replied with a cryptic smile. She sees your potential. The raw, untamed power you wield. It fascinates her. She wants to shape it, to mold it. She moved a little closer, their shoulders brushing. I, on the other hand, think, untamed, is so much more interesting. Naruto wasn't a fool. He'd dealt with enough complex personalities in his life to recognize the currents flowing beneath Akeno's playful surface. There was a genuine warmth there, but it was guarded by a wall of teasing flirtation and a hint of something sadder, deeper. He also knew that Rias's pride was her armor, hiding a fierce loyalty and a genuine desire to protect those she considered her own. They were like the sun and the moon, and he was the poor planet caught in their orbit. Once their escort turned back, the landscape reverted to the familiar, unsettling gray. They traveled for hours, the silence of the world pressing in on them again. It was Akeno who spotted the tracks. 3 of them, she said, kneeling to examine the disturbed earth. Silent Legion foot soldiers, moving with purpose. And fresh. Within the hour, Naruto's senses went on high alert. Let's see where they're going. But stay quiet. They moved through the skeletal woods like ghosts, a silent trio of predators. Naruto took the lead, his shinobi training making him a natural scout. He found the camp less than a mile away, nestled in a sunken hollow. He motioned for the others to get down, and they crawled to the edge of the depression, peering through the gnarled roots of a dead tree. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was not a military camp. It was a ritual site. In the center of the hollow, a 20-foot obelisk of jagged, obsidian-like rock pulsed with a sickening black light. Around it, a dozen figures, men, women, and even a few older children, were suspended in the air, encased in shimmering, crystalline cocoons. Thin tendrils of their life force, visible as faint streams of white light, air being siphoned from the cocoons and fed into the pulsating obelisk. The villagers were alive, their faces slack, their bodies occasionally twitching in a silent agony. The land for 100 feet around the obelisk was worse than dead. It was actively being unmade, the very soil turning to fine, black dust. Brawler guards patrolled the perimeter, and robed figures, their faces hidden in deep cowls, chanted in a low, guttural language around the obelisk. "They're using them as batteries," Rias whispered, her voice tight with fury. "They're sacrificing them to power a ritual that permanently corrupts the land, expanding their master's influence. We have to stop them," Naruto said, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He remembered the villagers of Oakhaven, their hopeful faces. These could have been them. "A direct assault is our only option," Rias stated, her eyes glowing with crimson power. "I will obliterate the obelisk and everyone near it. And kill the villagers in the process," Akeno countered, her playful demeanor gone, replaced by a cold seriousness. "We can't do that, President. If that ritual completes, this entire region will become a dead zone like the forest we woke up in." Rias shot back. "More will die. It is a necessary sacrifice." "There's no such thing," Naruto said, his voice cutting through their argument. It was quiet, but held an uncertainty that made them both fall silent. "Not when there's another way. We don't trade lives. Not ever." They both looked at him. He was no longer the boy caught between them, he was the commander. "Here's the plan," he said, his eyes scanning the layout of the camp. "Akeno, you can control the weather, right?" "Lightning." Akeno nodded. "I can call a storm. It will take a few minutes to gather." "Good. Do it. Make it loud. Use the storm as cover. I need you to take out the patrols on the perimeter. But you have to be precise. Use your holy lightning. We need them knocked out, not blown to bits." "Can you do it?" "I can strike the fleas off a dog without harming it," she said with a flicker of her usual confidence. Naruto turned to Rias. "The chanters are focused on the ritual. The cocoons are likely powered by the obelisk. The moment the villagers are free, that thing is going to go critical. It might even detonate. I need you to be ready. The second I give the signal, you have to destroy that obelisk. Not with a wave of power, but with a single, concentrated beam. Erase it completely before it can explode." Rias's eyes narrowed. "That requires immense precision and control." "Yo, you told me your power was precise and absolute," Naruto said, meeting her gaze. "Prove it." A slow smile touched her lips. "And what will you be doing, Naruto Uzumaki?" "I'm going to get the villagers," he said simply. "While you two are putting on your light show." There were no more arguments. They were a single unit with a single purpose. Akeno moved back from the ridge, her eyes closing as she began to murmur an incantation. The sky, already a dull parchment, began to darken further. A low rumble of distant thunder echoed through the hollow. The robed chanters faltered, looking up at the sudden change in weather. It was the distraction Naruto needed. He created a single shadow clone. "You know what to do," he whispered. The clone nodded and vanished into the shadows. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Naruto took a deep breath and moved. He was a whisper, a shadow flowing down the side of the hollow, his movements silent and sure. The brawler patrols were agitated by the storm. Their attention focused on the sky. Then the lightning started. It was not the wild, forked lightning of a natural storm. It was a series of brilliant, violet-white lances that descended from churning clouds with pinpoint accuracy. Each bolt struck a brawler patrol, not with explosive force, but with a sharp crack. The beasts seized up, their bodies spasming, before collapsing in twitching, unconscious heaps. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly effective. The chanters, realizing this was an attack, turned from the obelisk. But it was too late. Naruto was already among them. He moved like a dancer of death. His attacks swift and brutal. An elbow to the throat of one, a sweeping leg kick to another. He wasn't trying to kill them, just incapacitate them. At the same time, his clone emerged from the other side of the camp, drawing the attention of the remaining conscious guards. The hollow devolved into controlled chaos. Naruto reached the crystalline cocoons. He could feel the life force being drained from the people inside. He placed his hand on the nearest one. It was humming with a dark, greedy energy. He tried to channel his chakra into it, to disrupt the flow, It was like trying to push against a solid wall. The crystal was designed to resist. Think, Naruto. It's not a jutsu, it's a machine. Machines have a power source. His eyes followed the tendrils of light. They didn't just connect to the obelisk. They all originated from smaller, fist-sized black crystals embedded in the ground beneath each cocoon. The control nodes. Rias, now, he yelled over the howling wind and thunder. High on the ridge, Rias's body was already enveloped in a swirling vortex of crimson energy. She'd been waiting for the signal. Her hands came together, and the churning power began to compress, forming a thin, impossibly dense beam of pure destruction aimed at the heart of the obelisk. Akeno, cover me, she commanded. Akeno, her work on the perimeter done, unleashed a chain of lightning that formed a protective barrier, striking down the few guards who tried to rush Rias's position. Naruto, meanwhile, slammed a Rasengan into the nearest control node. The crystal shattered, and the cocoon it was powering flickered and dissolved. The villager inside, a middle-aged man, fell limply to the ground. One down. Naruto created a dozen clones. Break the nodes. All of them. The clones swarmed the remaining cocoons, each one forming a small Rasengan. As Rias's beam of annihilation lanced across the hollow and struck the obelisk, the clones shattered the nodes in a coordinated series of impacts. The effect was cataclysmic. The obelisk, pierced through the center by the power of destruction, began to implode, its dark energy collapsing inward. At the same time, the cocoons vanished, and the remaining villagers fell to the rain-slicked ground. The ritual was broken. A shockwave of silent, dark energy erupted from the imploding obelisk, but Rias's beam held firm. A crimson line of order against the chaos, forcing the implosion to consume itself until nothing was left but a smoking, glassed crater. The storm subsided as quickly as it had begun. The rain softened to a drizzle. The battle was over. It had taken less than 5 minutes. Naruto and his clones rushed to the fallen villagers, checking for pulses. They were all alive, just unconscious. Relief, profound and overwhelming, washed over him. He looked up at Rias and Akeno, who were making their way down into the hollow. He gave them a wide, triumphant grin. See, no necessary sacrifices. Rias allowed herself a small, proud smile. Akeno winked at him. It was in that moment of victory that the new threat appeared. They crested the ridge of the hollow, moving with a discipline that made the Silent Legion look like a disorganized mob. There were 24 of them, clad in immaculate, interlocking plate armor of silver and deep forest green. They held tower shields that hummed with magical energy and carried swords that shone with a cold, holy light. They fanned out, forming a perfect, unbreakable shield wall, blocking the only exit from the hollow. Leading them was a man who walked with an unnerving calm. His armor was the same, but etched with gold leaf. He wore no helmet, revealing a stern, handsome face with short-cropped gray hair and eyes the color of winter steel. He stopped 20 paces from Naruto's group, his gaze sweeping over the scene, the unconscious guards, the smoking crater, the rescued villagers, before settling on Naruto, Rias, and Akeno. Anomaly designation. Player. Peerage members. 2. Unregistered summons, the man said, his voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. You have interfered with a local matter and wielded powers far beyond the mortal coil. By the authority of the Vidian Covenant, you are under arrest. Naruto stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the unconscious villagers. We just saved these people. Who the hell are you? I am Commander Valerius of the Vidian Order, the man replied, his gaze unwavering. And we are the wardens of this world. Our mandate is to identify, contain, and, if necessary, RGE otherworldly threats before they can fester. Threats like you. Rias bristled beside Naruto. You dare. We just prevented a great evil. You prevented nothing, Valerius countered, his tone flat. You merely fought one symptom of the disease. You are the disease. Your very presence here is a violation of natural law. Your power acts as a beacon, drawing things like the Silent Legion, creating chaos wherever you go. You are not saviors. You are a plague. The sheer, unshakable certainty in his voice was more chilling than any monster's snarl. These weren't fanatics screaming about heresy, they were cold, logical exterminators who believed they were right. You watched, Naruto said, the realization dawning on him. You sat up there and watched while these people were being drained of their lives. We were assessing the situation, Lyria stated without a hint of shame. The ritual would have corrupted this hollow, a strategically acceptable loss. Had it threatened to spread, we would have sterilized the area. The villagers were already forfeit. A regrettable, but necessary, cost. The phrase hung in the air, a perfect echo of Rias's earlier words. Her face paled slightly. Naruto felt a rage, cold and pure, rise within him. You talk about costs. About necessity, he said, his voice dangerously low. He gestured behind him at the villagers, a few of whom were beginning to stir. Their lives are not a cost. They're the whole damn point. We fight to protect them. What do you fight for? Your mandate, your order. You're just cowards hiding behind rules. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed Valerius's face. Your sentimentality is a weakness. It will be your undoing. He raised his hand, and the knights of the order raised their swords, the holy light flaring. Surrender now, and we will grant you a swift end. Resist, and your end will be educational. Naruto fell into a combat stance. Rias and Akino moved to flank him, their own powers beginning to rise. A new battle was about to begin. Papa, a small voice cut through the tension. One of the rescued villagers, a little girl no older than 7, had woken up. She was looking at the unconscious man Naruto had freed first. Papa, wake up, she whimpered, shaking his shoulder. The sight seemed to break a spell. The other villagers began to stir, groaning, looking around in confusion at the armored soldiers and the strange trio who had saved them. Valerius's gaze flickered to the girl, then back to Naruto. His jaw tightened. He had come here to eliminate 3 anomalies. Starting a battle in front of 24 civilians his order was sworn to protect, was a political and logistical nightmare. His perfect, sterile operation had just been contaminated by the one thing his logic couldn't account for: messy, unpredictable, grateful humanity. He held his hand up, and his soldiers lowered their weapons, albeit reluctantly. You have made a powerful enemy today, player, Valerius said. His voice a low promise of future violence. We will not be so constrained by circumstance next time. Know this. Every step you take, we will be watching. And when you falter, when your power grows too great to be ignored, we will cut you down. He turned with a swirl of his green cloak. Vidian order, withdraw. As one, the knights turned and marched away, their discipline absolute, disappearing over the ridge as silently as they had arrived. Naruto, Rias, and Akino were left standing in the rain-soaked hollow, surrounded by the dazed and grateful people they had rescued. They had won the battle, saved the innocent, and stared down a new, terrifyingly human enemy. But as Naruto looked at the faces of the people who now owed him their lives, he didn't feel like a victor. He felt the immense, crushing weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Their list of enemies was growing, and their journey had only just begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Court of Whispers. Responsibility was a heavy cloak. Naruto's group was no longer a trio of wandering warriors, they were the guardians of 24 traumatized but grateful civilians. Escorting them to the capital, Lyria slowed their pace to a crawl. But it was a journey that reshaped their dynamic. Naruto, who had spent his life fighting for the faceless concept of a village, now found himself fighting for these specific faces. He listened to their stories, helped them forage for food, and used his clones to scout ahead, ensuring their path was safe. Rias, initially aloof, found her noble instincts taking over. She organized the small caravan, mediated disputes with a firm but fair hand, and used her commanding presence to give the terrified villagers a sense of order and hope. Akino, in a surprising turn, became the group's heart. She used her gentle charm to soothe the crying children and her knowledge of herbology to treat the sick, her playful facade melting away to reveal a deep, nurturing empathy. Their conversations, held over crackling campfires at night, turned from their own predicament to the world they now inhabited. They learned of the Silent Legion's slow, inexorable advance over the past decade. Of a king who was growing increasingly isolated, and of a nobility fractured by fear and ambition. They also spoke of the Vidian Order, the world's grim protectors. They're not evil, Naruto found himself saying one night, staring into the flames. Just broken. They've seen so much darkness they've forgotten what the light looks like. Their logic is sound, in a ruthless way, Rias admitted, her expression troubled. If our presence truly exacerbates this crisis, our very existence here is a selfish act. Or maybe, Akino countered, her voice soft, we are the cure they're too blind to see. When the high, white walls of Lyria finally rose on the horizon, a collective sigh of relief went through the caravan. The city was a marvel of stone and slate, its spires and towers reaching for the gray sky. A bastion of civilization against the encroaching silence. But as they passed through the massive gates, Naruto felt a different kind of chill. The city wasn't dead, but it was sick. The royal guards on the walls were clad in immaculate plate, but their eyes were filled with suspicion, their gazes lingering on every new face. The streets, though clean and paved, were subdued. People moved with a quiet urgency. Their conversations held in low whispers. The air was thick with paranoia, a perfect breeding ground for the kind of silent corruption they had just fought in the wilderness. After ensuring the villagers were safely delivered to a refugee temple, their story of rescue earning the group a small purse of gold and a writ of thanks from a city magistrate, the T.R. of them gathered in a quiet tavern to plan their next move. This city is a powder keg, Rias observed, her fingers tracing the rim of a wine goblet. The king is apparently old and without a direct heir. The noble houses are circling like vultures. We need allies, and we need information. Shouting about a god of silence will only get us locked in an asylum. So we do what we do best, Naruto said, leaning forward. We dig. They split up, each playing to their strengths. Rias, using the writ of thanks and her own innate nobility as a key, secured an audience with a minor court official, Lord Brahm. Naruto watched her go, garbed in a simple but elegant dress Akino had helped her procure. She looked every inch the visiting dignitary, her crimson hair a beacon of authority. Her maiden G was a masterclass in social maneuvering. She presented herself as a wandering noblewoman from a distant, unnamed land, her companions her sworn protectors, expressing her deep concern over the banditry they had encountered. Lord Brahm, a portly man with sweat on his brow, was easily flattered and quick to gossip. Banditry, you call it, he scoffed. A pretty name for the creeping rot. The king holes himself up in the palace, listening only to the captain of the royal guard, a man of low birth named Tybalt. The old faiths are failing, my lady. People are desperate. They whisper of a new power, one that promises peace. The peace of the grave, I say. Meanwhile, Akino found her own hunting ground in a wine bar near the barracks, a place where off-duty guards came to complain. Dressed in a form-fitting tavern maid's outfit that left little to the imagination, she was a magnet for attention. She laughed, poured wine, and listened, her violet eyes missing nothing. A young, boastful corporal, eager to impress her, spoke of strange, late-night gatherings at the estate of Duke Valerius, no relation to the Vidian commander, but a powerful and reclusive nobleman known for his eccentric beliefs. Secret meetings, the corporal slurred, his hand getting a little too familiar on her arm. Only the Duke's most trusted get an invitation. They say he's found a new god. One for a new age. Akino's smile never wavered as she gently removed his hand, her mind filing away the information. That night, Naruto put their findings into action. Clad in a simple black outfit that blended with the city's shadows. He was once again the shinobi. The Duke's estate was a fortress in the noble quarter, its walls high and its grounds patrolled. For Naruto, it was a playground. He moved like smoke, a silent flicker across the rooftops, bypassing the patrols with an ease that would have terrified them if they'd known he was there. He found a high balcony overlooking the Duke's private garden and settled in, masking his presence. Becoming just another shadow, he didn't have to wait long. A dozen figures, all clad in the fine silks of the nobility, gathered in the garden. Duke Valerius, a gaunt man with feverish eyes, led them in a low, chilling chant. And in the silence, we shall find true order. In entropy, true peace. Lord Malachor will cleanse this noisy, chaotic world, and we, his whispering choir, shall be the instruments of his tranquility. Naruto listened, his blood turning to ice, as they finalized their plan. They saw the king not as a ruler, but as a symbol of the world's chaotic life. His death, during the upcoming banquet of the harvest moon, would shatter the kingdom's morale and create a power vacuum, paving the way for the Legion's next major offensive. Their agent was already in place, Captain Tybalt, the one man the king trusted implicitly. Naruto slipped away as silently as he had come, the Duke's final words echoing in his mind. The king will fall, and the age of silence will begin. 2 days later, the grand hall of the royal palace was a sea of color and sound. The banquet of the harvest moon was in full swing. Nobles in their finest attire mingled, musicians played, and servants bustled with trays of food and wine. Naruto, Rias, and Akino moved through the crowd, looking utterly out of place and yet fitting in perfectly. Rias had used her new contact, Lord Brahm, to secure them an invitation. She was a vision in a deep crimson gown, a foreign duchess of mysterious wealth. Akino, in a shimmering violet dress, was her lady-in-waiting, and Naruto, in a stark black formal jacket that felt like a straitjacket, was their grim-faced bodyguard. The Duke is by the fountain, Rias murmured, taking a delicate sip of wine. He's been speaking with Captain Tybalt for the past 10 minutes. They're thicker than thieves, and a half-dozen of the royal guards have been replaced with men I don't recognize, Akino added, her smile fixed as her eyes darted around the room. They're trying to look natural, but they're too tense. They're coiled springs. The wine, Naruto said, his voice low. The king's personal goblet. The servant who just filled it has the same ring as the Duke. It's poison. They had a dozen different threads of the plot, but they couldn't just act. Accusing the captain of the guard and a powerful Duke in the middle of a CKED hall without proof would be suicide. They had to wait for the conspirators to make their move. The king, a frail, white-bearded man who looked lost in his own throne room, raised his goblet for a toast. To the harvest, and to the resilience of Lyria. Captain Tybalt stood beside him, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his face a mask of loyal vigilance. He gave the Duke a nearly imperceptible nod. Now, Naruto hissed. Rias moved first. Your Majesty, she called out, her voice ringing with false alarm as she tripped, stumbling toward the throne and bumping the arm of the servant holding the wine tray. The tray clattered to the floor, the poisoned wine spilling harmlessly onto the marble. The hall fell silent, every eye turned to them. Captain Tybalt's face hardened. The pretense was over. Seize them, he roared at his men. They are assassins. The loyal guards moved to obey, but the dozen cultist guards drew their own swords and moved faster, forming a deadly circle not around our heroes, but around the throne itself. Their blades pointed at the stunned nobles. Duke Valerius simply smiled, a fanatic's calm on his face. It seems the plan has changed, Tybalt said, his voice dropping to a cold snarl. He drew his own blade, a magnificent greatsword that shimmered with enchantments. No poison, then, just steel. He turned his blade on the shocked and terrified king. Your reign of noise and chaos is over, old man. Like hell it is, Naruto shouted. He was already moving, a black blur weaving through the screaming nobles. Akino and Rias were right with him. Rias unleashed a small, contained burst of destructive energy that sent 2 cultist guards flying. Akino summoned a crackling ball of lightning in her hand, her gentle smile replaced by a predator's grin. They formed a protective triangle around the throne, shielding the king. You cannot stop this, Tybalt bellowed, swinging his greatsword. It was not a clumsy weapon. He wielded it with a dancer's grace and a butcher's strength. Naruto met the blow with a chakra-infused kunai, the impact sending a jarring shock up his arm. The man was incredibly strong. The hall erupted into chaos. The nobles screamed and scrambled for cover. The loyal guards, outnumbered and confused, clashed with the cultists. It was a swirling, desperate melee. Akino was a whirlwind of lightning, her attacks precise and non-lethal, dropping cultists with well-aimed jolts. Rias was a bulwark of crimson power, deflecting sword strikes and enchanted bolts with small, potent shields of destruction. But the main threat was Tybalt. He was a one-man army, his enchanted blade cutting through Naruto's defenses. He feinted, forcing Naruto to dodge left, and then brought the pommel of his sword around in a brutal arc that caught Naruto in the ribs. Naruto gasped, the wind knocked out of him. Tybalt pressed the advantage, his greatsword whistling down in an executioner's blow aimed at the exposed king. There was no time to block, no time to dodge. Naruto did the only thing he could. He threw his own body in the way, twisting to take the blow on his back. His only thought was to protect the old man cowering behind him. It was a pure, selfless, and incredibly foolish act of protective instinct. Pain, white-hot and absolute, exploded in his back as the enchanted steel bit deep. He felt his own bones crack. It was a fatal blow. But in that moment of absolute, selfless resolve, the system responded. Condition met. Self-sacrifice in defense of the helpless. Willpower has overcome physical limitations. Experience points gained. 1000. Level up. Player. Naruto Uzumaki. Level 3. A tidal wave of power, far greater than before, flooded his system. His body, on the verge of being cleaved in two, suddenly surged with energy. The wound began to stitch itself together with an audible sizzling sound. But the sword was still coming. The power surge wouldn't be fast enough to prevent the blow from landing. Tybalt's eyes widened in shock at his victim's impossible resilience, but he pushed his attack home, determined to finish the job. The world seemed to slow. The screaming faded. Naruto could see the edge of the blade, inches from his spine, and then the light came. It wasn't crimson or violet. It was a simple, clean, white light that flashed in the space between Naruto and the blade. It lasted for only a fraction of a second. When it was gone, a figure stood there. It was a small girl, petite and looking no older than 15, with short white hair and hazel eyes that held a catch-on slant. She was dressed in the same school uniform as the others, and her expression was completely blank, almost bored. She was holding Captain Tybalt's massive, enchanted greatsword. More accurately, she caught the descending blade in one small, delicate hand, stopping its momentum completely. The entire hall fell silent. The sounds of battle died away as everyone, cultist, guard, and noble alike, stared at the impossible sight. Tybalt's face was a mask of disbelief. He put all his weight, all his strength, into pushing the blade down. It didn't budge. It was like trying to push over a mountain. The white-haired girl, Kaneko, looked from the blade to Tybalt, her expression unchanging. "You're heavy," she stated, her voice a soft, deadpan monotone. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she broke his sword in half. She followed the motion with a single, swift punch to his stomach. It wasn't flashy. It didn't crackle with energy. But the sound it made, a dull, sickening thump, echoed through the hall. Captain Tybalt's eyes rolled back in his head. The air rushed from his lungs, and he collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, utterly unconscious. The remaining cultists stared at their defeated leader, then at the tiny girl who had just shattered his legendary sword with a single touch. Their fanaticism broke, replaced by a primal, instinctual fear. They dropped their weapons and surrendered. The battle was over. Naruto, his back already mostly healed by the level up, pushed himself to his feet. He looked at Rias and Akino, who were staring at their new companion with open-mouthed shock. Then he looked at the quiet, white-haired girl who was now inspecting her knuckles with a detached curiosity. He, Rias Gramori, Akino Himahima, and their new, unnervingly strong ally, Kaneko Tuju, stood together in the center of the ruined banquet hall, the king safe behind them, and the whispers of the court turning from fear of the cult to awe, and terror, of them. Their lives had just gotten exponentially more complicated. Again. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Rook's Resolve and the Warlord's Domain. The immediate aftermath of the battle was a storm of quiet, frantic activity. The loyal royal guard secured the hall, tending to the wounded and arresting the dazed members of the Whispering Choir. Duke Valerius was found dead in a corner, a small vial of fast-acting poison C. Lutched in his hand, a zealot's final act of devotion to the silence. Amidst the chaos, King Theron, his face pale but his eyes alight with a newfound resolve, had dismissed his panicked courtiers, keeping only Naruto and his companions in the now silent, debris-strewn throne room. He sat upon his throne, no longer a frail old man, but a monarch who had stared into the abyss and survived. His gaze fell upon each of them in turn: Rias, whose regal bearing now seemed perfectly at home in a royal court; Akino, whose playful smile had returned, though it now held a dangerous edge; the new girl, Kaneko, who stood silently, nibbling on a pastry she'd somehow procured from a wrecked dessert table; and finally, Naruto. "Captain Tybalt was my most trusted man for 20 years, the king said, his voice raspy with emotion. He was a commoner I raised up, a symbol of a meritocratic kingdom I dreamed of building. And he betrayed me. They all did. He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of years. You, on the other hand, you are anomalies. Strangers. And yet, you shielded my body with your own. His eyes locked onto Naruto. I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. The kingdom of Lyria owes you a debt. Rias stepped forward slightly. Your Majesty, we seek no reward. Only answers, and the means to fight the darkness that threatens this land. And you shall have it, the king declared. But your power, it is a fearsome thing. It breeds awe, but it also breeds terror and jealousy. The court is a snake pit. To keep you here would be to invite 1,000 new plots, both for and against you. You are a sword, and a sword is of no use rusting in a display case. It belongs on the frontier. He unrolled a map on the table beside his throne. Therefore, I am naming you, Naruto Uzumaki, a lord protector of the realm. And I grant you dominion over this territory. He pointed to a rugged, windswept region on the eastern edge of the kingdom. The stone marches. Akeno raised a delicate eyebrow. Rias's expression remained neutral, but Naruto could see the flicker of calculation in her eyes. She knew exactly what this was. The stone marches, the king continued, his voice booming with forced grandeur, are our great bulwark against the encroaching silence. A land of hardy folk and untamed wilds. It needs a strong ruler, a guardian to hold the line. You shall be that guardian. It was a brilliant political move. He was rewarding them with a title and land, publicly acknowledging his debt, while simultaneously exiling them from the capital and placing them on the front lines of the most dangerous part of the kingdom. He was aiming his new, unpredictable weapon at his greatest enemy. Naruto looked at Rias. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A domain of their own. A base of operations. A place to put down roots. It was better than being guests, or prisoners, in a gilded cage. We accept, Naruto said, his voice firm. The journey to the stone marches was stark. The lush farmlands around Lyria gave way to rolling hills, which in turn hardened into rugged, windswept plains and jagged stone tors. It was not a dead land like the gray forests, it was a land that was brutally, stubbornly alive. Hardy grasses clung to the stony soil, and twisted, resilient trees grew in the crevices of rocks, their branches permanently bent by a relentless wind. The people were much the same. They passed small, fortified hamlets where the villagers watched them with hard, suspicious eyes. These were not the soft citizens of the capital. This was a land that bred survivors. Their newest companion was a puzzle. Kaneko rarely spoke, communicating mostly through nods, shrugs, and the occasional, blunt, one-word answer. She spent most of the journey either eating snacks or napping, often at the same time. Rias tried to question her, to ascertain the nature of her abilities and her background, but was met with a wall of polite silence. Akeno's teasing and flirting simply slid off. Kaneko's stoic demeanor like water off stone. Naruto took a different approach. On their third day of travel, he found her sitting on a rocky outcrop, staring at the horizon. He sat down beside her, not speaking, and simply watched the wind whip through the hardy grass. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, he offered her a rice ball he'd saved. She took it, nibbled on it, and then spoke, her voice a quiet murmur. You smell like the sun. Naruto blinked. Thanks. It's warm, she clarified, before falling silent again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He understood. Like him, she was an outcast. Someone whose immense power set her apart. She communicated not with words, but with presence. She was judging him, and for now, she had not found him wanting. Their official welcome, to the stone marches came not with trumpets, but with the stark reality of their new domain. As they crested a high pass, they saw it, the fortress of Stonehold. It wasn't a castle of elegant spires, but a grim, practical fortress carved directly into the side of a mountain, its walls the color of granite and iron. Blocking the road before them was a welcoming party of about 30 warriors. Why were clad not in the gleaming plate of the royal guard, but in scarred, functional steel and boiled leather. They carried heavy axes and thick, iron-banded shields. Their leader stood before them, a mountain of a man with a wild, gray-streaked black beard, a bald head covered in faded tattoos, and arms as thick as tree trunks. He carried a colossal, two-handed war maul slung over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. His eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, missed nothing. The king sent word, the man boomed, his voice like rocks grinding together. Sent a royal decree, pretty ribbon and all. He's given our lands to a new Lord Protector. He spat on the ground. The king's seal is worthless here. We haven't seen a royal knight in 10 years. We held this land. We bled for it. We fed it with our own hands. It belongs to us. Quote, we have no intention of taking anything from your people, Rias said, her voice calm and aristocratic. We are here to help you hold it. The giant laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Help. A pampered noblewoman, a smiling whore, a quiet little girl, and their blonde lapdog. Akino's smile tightened, and Rias's eyes flared with crimson light. Naruto held up a hand, stopping them. He stepped forward. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Who are you? I am Kalen, the man declared. And these are my people. I rule the stone marches not by divine right or royal decree, but because I am the strongest. Because I am the one who can protect them. If you want this land, Lord Uzumaki, you don't get it with a piece of paper. You earn it, the old way. He slammed the head of his war maul into the ground, cracking the stone beneath it. You fight me, one-on-one. The winner rules the marches. The loser leaves, or serves. Before Naruto could answer, a piercing shriek echoed from the cliffs above. A shadow fell over them, and something immense crashed down into the middle of the road, sending rocks and soldiers flying. It was a stone-hide behemoth, a local creature Ellen's men had apparently been trying to hunt. It was a quadrupedal monstrosity the size of a war elephant, its height a thick, overlapping plating of rock and crystal. It roared, spraying them with spittle, and charged. Kalen's men reacted instantly, their discipline absolute. Shield wall, pikes, bleed it, drive it off the cliff. Kalen bellowed, hefting his maul. But before they could even form up, Kaneko sighed. A sound of mild annoyance, as if she'd been interrupted from a pleasant nap. She took a single step forward. The behemoth, a creature of pure, charging momentum and geological force, bore down on her. Kalen yelled a warning. Rias and Akino prepared to intervene. Naruto watched, a feeling of absolute confidence settling in his gut. Kaneko didn't even brace herself. She simply cocked her right fist back and, as the monster's stony maw was about to engulf her, she punched it in the face. There was no flash of light, no crackle of energy. There was only a sound. A dull, wet act that was louder and more final than any thunderclap. The behemoth's charge stopped instantly. The solid rock of its armored head shattered, caving inward like an eggshell. The creature's immense body, all several tons of it, was lifted off its feet and sent flying backward, tumbling end over end until it crashed into the side of the cliff and slid down into the chasm below. Silence. Kalen and his 30 hardened warriors stared, their mouths agape, at the spot where the monster had been. Then they stared at the tiny, white-haired girl who was now shaking her hand lightly, a bored expression on her face. Kalen slowly turned his gaze to Naruto, a new, profound respect dawning in his eyes. He looked at Kaneko, then at the confident expressions on Rias and Akino's faces. These were not pampered nobles. They were monsters. The duel still stands, Kalen said, his voice now lacking its earlier bravado. The people must see their leader's strength. But I see now, this will be no easy fight. The arena was a flat, circular plateau a mile from the fortress, surrounded by jagged standing stones. Kalen's people formed a silent ring around it. Rias, Akino, and Kaneko stood on one side, watching with rapt attention. Kalen stood opposite Naruto, hefting his war maul. He wore no armor but leather pants and boots. No tricks, he said. No magic fire from the sky or lightning from your pet witch. Just you and me, steel and bone. Just us, Naruto agreed, stretching his neck. The duel began. Kalen didn't charge. He stomped his foot, and the very rock beneath Naruto's feet buckled and shot upward. Naruto leapt back, surprised by the warlord's control over the terrain. Kalen was on him in an instant, his maul swinging in a devastating arc that whistled through the air. Naruto was forced onto the defensive. Kalen was a force of nature. His strength was immense, his movements deceptively fast for a man his size. Naruto used clones, but Kalen smashed through them as if they were mist. His eyes never leaving the original. Naruto tried a Rasengan, but Kalen met it with the flat of his maul, the weapon glowing with a faint earthen energy. The resulting explosion sent them both staggering back. Kalen was grinning, a wild, joyful look in his eyes. Yes, this is a fight. This is what it means to be alive. Naruto was bruised, battered, and on the verge of being overwhelmed. Kalen wasn't just strong, he was connected to this land, drawing strength from the very stone he stood on. Naruto realized he couldn't win by fighting the man. He had to fight the mountain. He needed more power, not just his own, but the world's. He dodged another crushing blow and created a dozen clones, sending them in to buy him a few precious seconds. He leapt to the top of one of the standing stones, closed his eyes, and fell into a meditative stance. Feel it, Naruto, Jiraiya's voice echoed in his memory. Feel the world around you. The air, the earth, the life. It's all energy. It's all connected. He reached out with his senses. He felt the ceaseless wind of the marches. He felt the unyielding strength of the ancient stone beneath him. He felt the stubborn, hardy life in tea. He grass and the hawks circling high above. He drew it in. The natural energy of Ethelgerd, wild and potent, flowed into him. Orange pigment flared around his eyes. His pupils elongated, becoming toad-like. He had entered sage mode. When he opened his eyes, the world was different. He could see the flow of energy in Kalen's body, could feel the vibrations of his movements through the stone, cool. Sensed the path of his maul before it was even swung. He dropped from the stone. Kalen charged to meet him, swinging his maul in a blow that could shatter a fortress gate. Naruto didn't dodge. He MPLY moved his head a few inches to the side. The maul roared past, missing him by a hair's breadth. He placed one hand on Kalen's charging stomach and whispered, "Frog Kata." The natural energy surrounding him became an extension of his body. The gentle push became a devastating blow. Kalen, for all his mass and strength, was sent flying backward as if hit by an invisible cannonball, crashing into one of the standing stones. He staggered to his feet, coughing, a look of utter disbelief on his face. What was that power? You said you draw your strength from this land, Naruto said, his voice calm, layered with the resonance of nature itself. So do I. He held out his hand. A Rasengan formed, but this one was different. It was larger, more stable, and humming with a visible aura of natural energy. Sage art. Giant Rasengan. He didn't charge. He simply stood there, an offer and a threat. The personification of the land's true power. Kalen looked at Naruto, at the immense power he now wielded. A power that felt ancient and primal, a power of the earth itself. He looked at his shattered maul, then back at the calm, confident warrior before him. He saw not a conqueror, but a kindred spirit. He dropped the handle of his weapon. It clattered on the stone. He walked forward, bruised and battered, and fell to one knee before Naruto. His warriors gasped. Rias and Akino smiled. Kaneko took another bite of her pastry. The stone marches are yours, Kalen said, his voice filled with a raw, hard-won respect. My strength, my sword, my life is yours to command, Lord Protector Uzumaki. Naruto let the Rasengan dissipate, the orange pigment around his eyes fading. He reached down and offered his hand to the kneeling warlord. Get up, Kalen, he said with a grin. The Lord Protector needs a general. We've got work to do. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Scars of the Holy and the Fallen. Stonehold began to feel like a home. Under the joint leadership of Naruto and Kalen, the fortress and the surrounding lands transformed. Naruto's shadow clones became an invaluable resource, a tireless legion of builders and farmers who doubled the speed of every project. Walls were reinforced, watchtowers erected, and fallow fields were tilled and planted with hardy crops. Kalen, his initial skepticism replaced by a grudging, then genuine, respect, drilled his warriors, incorporating Naruto's clone feints and diversionary tactics into their brutal, straightforward fighting style. Rias, to no one's surprise, became the strategic and logistical mind of the entire operation. She managed food stores, organized patrol routes, and drew up defense plans with an efficiency that left Kalen's seasoned captains speechless. Kaneko, the silent powerhouse, became a local legend. When a rockslide blocked the main trade road, she spent an afternoon clearing boulders that would have taken 50 men a week to move, a feat for which she asked only a bag of chocolate as payment. Akeno, however, found her place among the people. She helped the healers, her knowledge of herbs and simple healing magic a welcome boon. She listened to the worries of the wives and mothers, her gentle smile a calming presence a balm against the harshness of their lives. For the first time, perhaps ever, she was simply Akeno, not the daughter of a fallen angel or the vice president of a demon peerage. She was wanted, and the guarded sadness in her eyes began to recede. Naruto saw it all, and a quiet sense of pride settled in his chest. This was what he had fought for in his own world. Not just victory, but the peace that came after. A community, a place to belong. The attack, when it came, was not heralded by the tramp of marching feet or the roar of a monster. It came as a whisper on the wind. It began at dusk. A strange, clammy fog rolled in from the east, clinging to the stone of the fortress. It was unnaturally cold and utterly silent. The guards on the walls felt a sudden, profound weariness. A bone-deep sorrow that had no source. Laughter died in the great hall. Fires seemed to burn a little less brightly. Kalen stormed around, bellowing at his men to shake off their melancholy, but even his booming voice sounded hollow. Swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere, Naruto felt it as a cold knot in his stomach. Kurama stirred within him, a low growl of warning. Genjutsu. No. This is something else. Something that smells like a dying soul. The four of them gathered in the main keep, the fog pressing against the thick windows. This isn't natural, Ria stated, her arms crossed, a frown on her face. I feel my power being dampened. Muted. It's sad, Kaneko said, her voice barely audible. She was curled in a chair, hugging her knees to her chest. The air is sad. Akeno was silent, her back to them, staring out the window into the swirling gray. It feels familiar, she murmured, a tremor in her voice. Then, the whispers started. Faint, insidious, audible only in the back of one's mind. They were not words, but feelings, echoes of forgotten pains and buried fears. Naruto felt a flash of loneliness so intense it almost buckled his knees, the swing set, the empty apartment. The accusing glares of the villagers. He shook his head, forcing it away. But for the others, it was too late. Rias gasped, her eyes widening. The boisterous keep faded away, replaced by the suffocating opulence of a Grimoire banquet hall. She was young again, trapped in a beautiful dress, and across from her, the arrogant, sneering face of Riser Phoenix. You are a prize, Rias. Your power, your body, your name, they all belong to my family now. You have no choice. The walls closed in, the laughter of the crowd a cage of mockery. Kaneko whimpered. She was no longer in Stonehold, but in a cold, dark cell. Through the bars, she could see a scaffold against a blood-red sky. Her sister, Kuroka, stood upon it, her expression not of fear, but of sad resignation. I'm sorry, Sharon, her sister's voice echoed. I'm a monster. Don't become like me. The fear of her own power, the terror of losing control and becoming the monster her sister was branded as, seized her heart. The psychic assault hit Akeno the hardest. The world dissolved into the scent of blood and burning incense. She was a little girl again, hiding behind a screen in the main hall of the Himahima clan. She saw her mother, Shuri, a gentle, beautiful woman, standing before a council of grim-faced elders. You have sullied our bloodline with the filth of a fallen one. The head elder spat. You and your half-breed spawn are a stain upon our honor. Barakiel is a good man, Shuri cried, her voice defiant. And our daughter is innocent. Then came the flash of steel. Akeno saw the swordsman, her own kin, her uncles and cousins, step forward. She saw her mother's blood, a shocking crimson, splatter across the paper screen she was hiding behind. She heard her own scream, a choked, helpless sound, as her world ended. The illusion was perfect, cruel, and all-consuming. The husk of memory, a psychic parasite of Malikor's design, had found its richest feeding ground in her pain. Naruto staggered back, clutching his head. He saw Jiraiya, sinking into the water, a bloody smile on his face. He saw Neji, a hole in his chest, his life fading in his arms. But behind the pain, There was a core of iron, a will forged in countless battles. Both physical and mental, he felt Kurama's rage surge within him, a burning counter-current to the psychic cold. This isn't real, he roared in his own mind. It's just an echo. With a sheer act of will, he shattered the illusions in his own head. The images flickered and died. He gasped, his vision clearing. He saw Rias, pale and trembling, trapped in a waking nightmare. He saw Kaneko, curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears. And he saw Akeno, on her knees, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wide with a horror a decade old. She was the anchor, the main battery for this psychic storm. Akeno, he yelled, but she couldn't hear him. He had to end this. Extending his senses, he felt the source of the attack. It was a vile, parasitic consciousness at the center of the fortress courtyard. Drawing power from the negative emotions it was generating, he burst from the keep. The courtyard was filled with the gray fog, and in the center hovered a grotesque creature. It was a withered, husk-like humanoid figure, its limbs long and thin, its face a featureless expanse of stretched, gray skin. It had no eyes, but he felt its psychic gaze turn to him, sensing his resistance. The husk intensified its assault. Naruto's vision filled with every failure, every moment of weakness in his life. But he gritted his teeth and pushed through it, a mantra of defiance in his soul. I am Naruto Uzumaki. I don't run. I don't give up. He reached the husk, his hand already forming a Rasengan, but as he drew close, he felt the overwhelming wave of Akeno's despair washing from it. She was trapped, drowning in her own past. He knew, with an instinct that transcended strategy, that simply destroying the husk's physical form wouldn't be enough. It would just release the psychic energy it had stolen, possibly killing Akeno in the process. He had to sever its connection to her. He had to go in. He placed his hand on the husk's cold, dry skin, and instead of attacking, he closed his eyes and poured his own chakra, his own will, into the psychic link. I'm coming, Akeno. The world shifted. He was no longer in the courtyard, but in the blood-splattered hall of the Himehime clan. He saw a young Akeno, hiding and screaming. He saw the cold, cruel faces of her family. He saw the dying form of her mother. The pain and grief in the room were so thick he could taste them. He walked through the scene, the phantoms of the past ignoring him, and knelt beside the small, weeping girl. It's okay, Akeno, he said softly. I'm here. The illusionary Akeno looked up, her eyes wide. You can't be here. Go away. They'll kill you too. The scene reset, playing again, her mother falling in a splash of crimson. The memory was a prison, a perfect loop of agony. I'm not leaving you, Naruto said, his voice firm. He didn't try to tell her it wasn't real. To her, it was the only reality. Instead, he put himself in it. He stood between her and the phantom swordsman. You want to hurt her, you go through me, he declared. The illusion wavered. The scene flickered between the Himehime Hall and the present-day Akeno, on her knees in the keep. The husk was fighting to maintain control. Why? The phantom of young Akeno whispered. Why are you helping me? I'm a monster, a filthy half-breed. That's what they said. They were wrong, Naruto said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. He turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. I see a woman who can call down lightning from the heavens. I see a woman who smiles to hide her pain, but uses her strength to heal others. I see your mother's kindness in you. And I see your father's power. You are not a half-breed. You are whole. You are Akeno Himehime. And you are my friend. You are not alone. Not anymore. He held out his hand. Fight with me. Akeno's real form in the keep convulsed. A tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. In the illusion, the little girl looked at his outstretched hand, and her form flickered, aging. Shifting into the Akeno he knew. Her eyes, filled with a decade of unshed tears, now held a new, burning light. She took his hand. In that moment, her power, her true self, erupted. Not just the demonic power she'd inherited from her father, but the holy power of her mother's lineage, the one she had suppressed and feared. A pair of black, feathery fallen angel wings erupted from her back, but at the same time, a brilliant, golden aura of holy lightning crackled around her fists. Back in the physical world, Naruto felt her power surge through their connection. Now, he yelled. He pulled his consciousness back into his own body. He stood before the husk, his right hand alight with the swirling blue of a Rasengan. Akeno, now on her feet in the keep, her eyes blazing, thrust her own hand forward. A torrent of golden holy lightning shot from the keep, ignoring distance and walls, and slammed into Naruto's Rasengan. The two powers fused. The blue chakra vortex was supercharged with crackling golden lightning. Rasengan. Chidori. Naruto roared, giving the new technique the first name that came to mind. He slammed the electrified sphere into the husk of memory. The creature released a silent, psychic scream that echoed in the minds of everyone in the fortress. The holy lightning tore through its parasitic nature, while the Rasengan annihilated its physical form. The gray fog across Stonehold evaporated in an instant, and the unnatural cold vanished, replaced by the crisp night air. The psychic feedback shattered. Rias and Kaneko gasped, the illusions in their minds breaking apart, leaving them trembling and disoriented. Akeno collapsed to the floor, the immense emotional and physical exertion leaving her utterly spent. Naruto stood in the courtyard, panting, the ghost of golden lightning still dancing on his knuckles. He had won, but the victory felt hollow, the emotional wounds of his friends a stark reminder of the cost. The system, however, cared only for results. Unique enemy defeated. Husk of memory. Spiritual and emotional fortitude tested beyond limits. Experience points gained. 2000. Level up. Player. Naruto Uzumaki. Level 4. The familiar, healing wave of power washed over him, but it did little to soothe the raw, frayed state of his soul. Level 4 milestone achieved. System detects critical spiritual damage in peerage members. Summoning protocol adjusted for support class. Initiating fourth summon. A gentle, emerald green light, completely different from the violent arrivals of the past, bloomed in the center of the keep. Right beside the weeping Akeno. The light was warm, smelling of fresh spring grass and hope. It coalesced into the form of a young, blonde-haired girl in a nun's habit, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear, confusion, and a deep, bottomless well of compassion. She looked around at the scene of emotional devastation, at Rias, pale and shaken, at Kaneko, withdrawn and silent, and at Akeno, who was sobbing with a decade's worth of pent-up grief. The newcomer, Asia Argento, didn't scream or demand answers. Her training, her very nature, took over. She instinctively moved to the person in the most pain. She knelt beside Akeno, her hands glowing with a soft, green light. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice kind and gentle. "Please, let me help." She placed her hands on Akeno's shoulders. The green light of her sacred gear, twilight healing, flowed into the fallen angel, and it began to mend not the wounds of the flesh, but the deep, ragged scars on her soul. Akeno's sobbing quieted, replaced by a shuddering peace. Naruto watched from the doorway of the keep, his own pain momentarily forgotten. Their enemy attacked the mind and the heart. The system, in its cold, inscrutable logic, had just given them a shield for their souls. It had given them a healer. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Bishop's Prayer and the Mortal Crusade. The arrival of Asia Argento was like the first rain after a long, brutal drought. Her gentle nature and unwavering kindness were a balm on the raw nerves of Stonehold. Where Naruto's group had brought strength and defiance, Asia brought hope and healing. The gruff, stoic warriors of the marches, who at first viewed the soft-spoken girl in a nun's habit with suspicion, were quickly won over. They saw her moving through the makeshift infirmary, her hands glowing with a warm, green light, mending wounds that their best healers had declared permanent. She asked for nothing in return, offering only a shy, radiant smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. Her presence had the most profound effect on Akeno. In the days following the battle with the husk, Asia spent hours with her, not just healing the lingering spiritual echoes of the trauma, but simply talking. She listened without judgment as Akeno spoke of her mother, her father, and the crushing weight of her dual heritage. For the first time, Akeno found someone who saw her not as a fallen angel's daughter or a powerful demoness, but as a person who was hurting. A fragile, tentative friendship bloomed between them, and the other members of the peerage saw a change in their priestess of thunder. Her smiles became more genuine, her laughter less edged with sadistic glee, and a quiet peace began to settle in her violet eyes. The team felt more complete, more balanced. They had a king, a queen, a rook, and a knight of sorts in Naruto. Now, They had their bishop, not a piece of strategy, but a font of compassion. This period of peace and reconstruction was a precious gift. They trained, they built, and they laughed. For a brief, blissful moment, it felt like they could truly build a new life here. But the Vidian Order did not deal in peace. They dealt in absolutes. From his mobile command post miles away, Commander Valerius reviewed the reports. The anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki, had not only survived his encounter with the Whispering Choir but had been granted a title and a fiefdom by the feckless king. He had subdued the renegade warlord Kalen, a feat the royal army had failed to accomplish for years. His power was growing, his influence spreading. Ao had 4 otherworldly beings in his retinue, a court of alien power forming on the kingdom's most volatile border. Valerius saw the pattern not as a series of heroic accidents, but as a calculated conquest. This was how new dark gods were born. They started as saviors, accumulating power and followers, until their nature inevitably corrupted them and they became the very thing they fought against. He would not let history repeat itself. The player was no longer an anomaly to be monitored, he was an Omega-level threat to be purged. The warning came from Kalen's scouts. An army, they reported, marching from the west. 10,000 strong, clad in green and silver, moving with the terrifying silence of absolute discipline. The Vidian Order was no longer watching. They were coming to pass judgment. An emergency council was held in Stonehold's Great Hall. Kalen and his captains stood on one side, their faces grim. Naruto and his peerage stood on the other. 10,000, Kalen growled, his hand resting on the hilt of a new, even larger war maul. And not a rabble like the Legion. These are the best soldiers in the world. Holy enchanted steel, anti-magic wards, siege engines built to topple demon castles. They come to wipe us off the map. We will meet them on the field, Rias declared, her eyes burning with crimson fire. My power can decimate their ranks before they even reach the walls. We'll turn them to ash, Akino added, a dangerous crackle of lightning dancing on her fingertips. No, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the war talk. Every eye turned to him. What do you mean, no? Kalen demanded. This isn't a duel, boy. This is war. They won't show us any mercy. I know, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over his friends, lingering for a moment on Asia's worried face. But we are not them. We are not the Silent Legion, and we are not the Vidian Order. They think we're monsters. We win by proving them wrong, not by proving them right. He looked at each of them. His expression one of iron resolve. Here is my order. We will defend this fortress. We will protect these people. We will defeat the Vidian Order. But we will not kill them. Subdue, incapacitate, disarm, but do not take a single life. Is that understood? A stunned silence filled the hall. Rias looked at him, a complex mixture of pride and concern on her face. Akino's lightning faded. Kaneko just nodded slowly. Kalen looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. They come to kill us, and you want us to fight with our hands tied. One of Kalen's captains protested. We fight with our ideals, Naruto countered, his voice ringing with conviction. If we sacrifice who we are to win, then we've already lost. We win our way, or not at all. The army of the Vidian Order was a terrifying sight. They flowed into the plains before Stonehold, a sea of disciplined steel, their green banners snapping in the wind. They set up their camp with chilling efficiency, their siege engines, massive ballistae etched with glowing, anti-magic runes, aimed at the fortress walls. There was no chaotic war cry, only the sound of thousands of armored feet moving as one. The first volley was a testament to their preparation. The bolts from the ballistae were not mere wood and steel, they trailing silver light, and they were aimed not at the walls, but at the sky above them. They exploded in a cascade of shimmering energy, forming a vast, crackling net of holy power that effectively neutered any large-scale demonic or lightning-based magic. Rias's plan to obliterate their ranks was countered before it could even begin. Clever bastards, Kalen grunted from the battlements. All right, lads, it's back to basics. Hold the walls. The assault began. Vidian knights marched forward, under the cover of a relentless volley of arrows, their shields forming an impenetrable turtle shell formation. They reached the walls and the brutal, close-quarters fighting began. It was a battle of controlled chaos. Kalen's warriors, roaring their defiance, met the silent, disciplined knights on the ladders and siege towers. Steel rang on steel, but Naruto's order hung over them. They fought to disarm, to wound, to push back, while their enemies fought to kill. Rias and Akeno, their wide-area attacks nullified, became surgical strikers. Rias used small, concentrated bursts of her power to shatter shields and break formations. Akeno called down precise, non-lethal lightning bolts to stun charging knights, her attacks a beautiful but terrifying dance of control. Kaneko was a fortress unto herself. A section of the wall was breached, and a dozen knights poured through. Before they could establish a foothold, Kaneko was there. She didn't throw a single punch. She simply stood in the breach, an immovable object, absorbing their sword blows and shield bashes without flinching, then calmly disarming them and throwing them back out like unruly children. But the heart of the battle was Asia. Terrified but resolute, she refused to stay in the safety of the inner keep. She moved through the chaos of the ramparts, a beacon of green light. She didn't fight, but her presence was worth more than 1,000 swords. A warrior from the marches went down, a holy enchanted sword in his gut. Before the knight could deliver the final blow, Asia was there, her hands glowing. The wound sealed, and the warrior scrambled back to his feet, looking at her with stunned, tearful gratitude before rejoining the fray. Her bravery, her absolute refusal to let anyone die, became a source of inspiration. On that spread through the defenders like wildfire. They were not just fighting for their homes, they were fighting for her. Naruto moved across the battlefield like a ghost. With 24 clones creating diversions and reinforcing weak points in the defense, he analyzed the flow of the battle. They were holding, but just barely. Kalen's men were taking injuries, and the Order's numbers were overwhelming. A defensive victory was impossible. He had to decapitate the snake. He spotted him, Commander Valerius, standing on a hill overlooking the battle, flanked by his elite guard, directing the assault with calm, precise hand gestures. "Kalen, hold the line," Naruto yelled, his voice carrying over the din. "I'm ending this." He entered Sage mode. The familiar orange markings appeared around his eyes as he drew on the energy of the embattled land itself. He created 100 clones, a massive wave of orange and black that crashed into the Order's flank, a chaotic diversion to draw their attention. And in that chaos, the real Naruto, moving at speeds the human eye could barely follow, shot like an arrow towards Valerius. Valerius saw him coming. He was not surprised. He was prepared. He drew his own sword, a blade that shone with a pure, white light, and gestured for his guard to stand down. "The anomaly is mine." Naruto landed before him, Rasengan already forming in his hand. "Call them off, Valerius. This is pointless." "The only thing that is pointless is your resistance," Valerius replied, his voice cold. He held up his gauntlet, which was covered in glowing seals. "I have studied you. Your chakra is a potent energy, but it can be disrupted." He lunged. The fight was a blur of motion. Valerius was faster, stronger than before, his blade leaving trails of holy light. Each strike aimed to sever a limb or pierce a heart. He fought with a cold, deadly precision. Naruto, empowered by Sage mode, was his equal, his senses screaming warnings, allowing him to dodge and weave through the deadly assault. "Look at the chaos you've wrought," Valerius snarled, their blades locking in a shower of sparks. "Men are bleeding because of your stubborn refusal to accept your nature. They're bleeding because you attacked their homes." Naruto roared back, pushing him away. He slammed a giant Rasengan into the ground between them. The earth erupted, the shockwave sending Valerius staggering back. Naruto didn't press the attack. "You talk about order, but all you bring is destruction. You're no different from the monsters you fight. I sacrifice the few to save the many. T is a calculus you are too sentimental to understand." Valerius activated the seals on his gauntlet. A wave of disruptive energy washed over Naruto, and his Sage mode flickered, the natural energy recoiling from the profane magic. For a moment, Naruto was weakened, his senses dulled. Valerius seized the opening, his holy sword streaking towards Naruto's neck. But Naruto had been fighting since he was a child. He had faced gods. He had faced loss. He had faced himself. He let his own chakra explode outward, a raw, untamed force of will that shattered the disrupting field. He caught Valerius's blade between his palms. the holy energy searing his skin. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet, his eyes glowing with Kurama's crimson energy. "You don't get to decide who is sacrificed. No one does." He tightened his grip, and with a scream of protesting metal, the holy sword of the Vidian commander shattered into a dozen pieces. Valerius stared in shock at the hilt in his hand. Naruto spun, and the back of his hand connected with the commander's head in a single, precise blow. Valerius's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence fell over the command hill. The elite guard stared, frozen, at their defeated commander. Naruto turned, his body battered but his will unbroken. He looked at the guards, then at the raging battle below, and he raised his voice. Imbued with chakra so that all could hear. "Your commander is defeated. Your crusade is over. Lay down your arms. Go home. We will not harm you. We are not your enemy." His voice washed over the battlefield. The knights of the Vidian order faltered, their assault losing its momentum as they saw their leader fall and heard Naruto's plea. They looked at the defenders on the walls, who, despite the brutality of the fight, had not killed a single one of their brethren. They saw their own wounded, disarmed and bound, not executed. The discipline of the order, for the first time, cracked. The assault wavered, and then it stopped. A horn sounded, the signal for a general retreat. As disciplined in defeat as in their attack, the Vidian order began to withdraw, carrying their wounded with them. They did not flee. They simply left the field. Naruto stood on the hill, watching them go. He had won. He had defended his home, his people, his family. And he had done it his way. But, as he looked over the battered walls of Stonehold and the exhausted faces of its defenders, he felt the immense weight of his victory. He hadn't just defeated an army. He had declared to the entire world that there was a third way. A path between the silence of Malachor and the ruthless order of men. It was a path of compassion and strength, a path that was harder and more painful than any other. And he and his friends would have to walk it alone. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Valkyrie's Gambit and the Divine Script. Victory brought with it the hard, unglamorous work of rebuilding. The Vidian Order's assault had left scars on both the walls of Stonehold and the psyche of its people. But in the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The shared struggle forged an unbreakable bow. Between Kalen's hardy warriors and Naruto's otherworldly family. Suspicion was replaced by camaraderie. Kalen's men, having seen Asia's courage on the battlements, treated her with a reverence usually reserved for saints. They watched in awe as Kaneko helped lift massive siege stones into place, and they listened with newfound respect as Rias outlined a more efficient system of patrols and rationing. The victory had solidified Naruto's rule in a way no king's decree ever could. He was not just their Lord Protector, he was the man who had fought beside them, the leader who had chosen to spare their enemies. Proving his strength was in his character as much as his fists. A fragile, hopeful peace settled over the stone marches, a small pocket of defiant life on the edge of the world's decay. The world, however, did not intend to let them rest. The first sign of trouble came from a scouting party that returned early from their patrol along the border of the Grey Forests. They stumbled into the fortress, not wounded, but sick, their faces pale, their bodies racked with a profound lethargy. The magical trinkets and good luck charms they carried, once imbued with minor enchantments, were now just inert pieces of wood and stone. "It's the air, my lord," the scout captain reported to Naruto, his voice a weak rasp. "The Grey Forest, it's growing. And the land it touches, it feels empty. Hollow." Naruto, Rias, and Akino went to investigate themselves. They stopped at the edge of the expanding corruption, a clear line where the hardy grass of the marches met the ashen soil of the deadlands. The air was cold, but it was a dead cold, lacking the crisp bite of winter. It was the absolute zero of absence. Rias held out her hand, summoning a small sphere of her power of destruction. It sputtered, flickering like a dying candle in a gale, before winking out entirely. She gasped, stumbling back. "My power, it's gone. The air here, it devours magic." Akino tried to summon a spark of lightning, but nothing happened. Her connection to the elements was simply not there. Naruto closed his eyes and tried to enter sage mode. He could feel the natural energy of the world, but on the other side of the line, it was thin, frayed, and sickeningly weak. It was like trying to breathe water. This was Malikor's true weapon. Not an army to conquer the world, but an encroaching void to unmake it. We can't fight this, Akeno said, her voice filled with a new kind of fear. You can't punch the air. You can't break an absence of power. They returned to Stonehold, the gravity of the Na-W threat settling over them like a shroud. Their physical strength meant nothing against an enemy that could simply erase the rules of their reality. That evening, Kalen sought them out in the Great Hall. He carried a heavy, dust-covered tome, its leather binding cracked with age. The old warlords, the ones who first settled these marches, they weren't just warriors, he said, his voice a low rumble. They were scholars of a sort. They feared the Great Silence, a god that would one day come to swallow the world's sound and color. He opened the book to a page with a crude, ink-drawn map. It showed a single, impossibly tall spire hidden deep within the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a treacherous range that formed the kingdom's northern border. They wrote of a place called the Spire of Scribes, Kalen explained. A sanctuary built by the first men, the ones who were here before any kingdom. They believed it held the world's founding words, the secrets to its making and its undoing. It's a legend, a children's story. But right now, a children's story is all we've got, Naruto finished, his eyes fixed on the map. It was a desperate, foolish hope. It was perfect. The journey to the Dragon's Tooth Mountains was arduous. Leaving Kalen in command of Stonehold, the full peerage, Naruto, Rias, Akeno, Kaneko, and Asia, traveled for days, pushing into the harsh, untamed north. The mountains were aptly named, a series of jagged, snow-capped peaks that clawed at the sky. They found the spire in a hidden valley, accessible only through a narrow, wind-blasted canyon. It was a single, seamless tower of pearlescent white stone that rose from the valley floor and disappeared into the clouds above, a structure so elegant and alien it seemed to have been grown rather than built. There was no visible door. The base of the spire was a smooth, unbroken wall, except for one section that shimmered like a heat haze. As they approached, the shimmering intensified, and intricate, silver runes began to flow across its surface, shifting and rewriting themselves in an endless, mesmerizing loop. A magical ward, Rias observed, her brow furrowed in concentration. And one of a complexity I've never seen before. This is not mortal magic. She stepped forward, gathering what demonic energy she could in the pure mountain air. Stand back. She unleashed a concentrated beam of destruction at the shimmering field. The beam struck, and for a moment, the runes flared brightly before the energy was simply absorbed, vanishing without a trace. The shimmering field didn't even flicker. Akeno tried next, calling down a bolt of holy lightning. Like Rias's power, it was swallowed by the runes. Kaneko strode forward and punched the field with all her might. Her fist met no resistance, passing through the shimmering light as if it were a hologram. Then, a voice echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds. It was ancient, genderless, and impossibly weary. I am the guardian. I am the door that is not a door. I have a key that is not a key. To open me, you must speak the word that has no sound. To pass, you must take the step that covers no distance. Force is ignorance. Power is futility. Only understanding may enter. The paradox hung in the air, a puzzle with no solution. They were stumped. Naruto closed his eyes. He couldn't brute force it. He had to think. Understanding. He sat, crossing his legs, and fell into the deep meditative state of sage mode. He didn't try to gather the world's energy, he tried to listen to it. He extended his senses, not just into the rock and the wind, but into the very fabric of this place. He felt it then. The spire wasn't just a building sitting on the land, it was an extension of it, like a nerve extending from the world's spine. And the shimmering door wasn't a ward on the spire, it was a function of the spire. A law of this specific space. The voice's riddle wasn't a password. It was a diagnostic prompt. He realized what he had to do. He couldn't just use the world's energy as a weapon. He had to interface with its operating system. He pushed his consciousness deeper, past the natural energy, seeking the cold, underlying logic he'd first touched when he'd fought Kalen. He sought the system itself. It was like pushing his mind through a wall of solid code. He felt the rules of his own reality, his chakra, his very soul, grating against the fundamental laws of Ethelgard. It was an agony of conceptual friction, but he pushed deeper, driven by a desperate need to understand. He wasn't just a player using the game's mechanics. He was trying to read the source code. This profound act, this attempt to bridge the gap between user and system, was a conceptual leap unlike any he had made before. The system, in its cold, binary way, responded. Player has attempted to interface with world code at a foundational level. Conceptual understanding has surpassed combat-based parameters. Experience points gained. 5,000. Level up. Player. Naruto Uzumaki. Level 5. The familiar wave of power was different this time. It wasn't just physical restoration, it was a flash of insight, an intuitive understanding of the interconnectedness of things that made his head spin. Level 5 milestone achieved. System acknowledges complex metaphysical problem. Standard peerage parameters insufficient. Summoning protocol. L adjusted for specialist. Arcane theory. Initiating 5th summon. A brilliant silver and blue light, as crisp and clean as the mountain air, flashed into existence before the shimmering door. When it faded, a tall, beautiful woman with impossibly long, silver blonde hair and wearing a fetching, if slightly revealing, magical girl-style outfit stood there. She looked around, her blue eyes wide with confusion. A stack of books held in her arms. By Odin's missing eye, she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of academic authority and flustered panic. What in the name of the 9 realms was that? A miscalculated spatial transference. My runic arrays are never this sloppy. She adjusted her glasses, her gaze falling upon Naruto and the others, then on the shimmering door. Her panic vanished, replaced by an all-consuming academic fascination. Incredible, she whispered, walking towards the runes, her earlier predicament completely forgotten. This isn't a simple ward or a temporal lock. It's a recursive causality loop tied to a multi-layered symbolic matrix. The arcanists who designed this were either geniuses or utter madmen. Look at the way this sequence collapses when observed with hostile intent. She turned to them, her eyes alight with intellectual fire. My name is Rossweiss. Who are you, and what is this magnificent piece of magical architecture? We're trying to get in, Naruto said, still reeling from the mental feedback loop. And it's not letting us. Rossweiss scoffed. Of course not. You're treating it like a locked door. It's not a door, it's a question. And its riddle is the key. The word that has no sound isn't silence, it's intent. The step that covers no distance isn't standing still, it's a shift in perspective. She began to pace, tracing runes in the air with her fingers. It's a Galder, an ancient Norse chant formula. It doesn't need to be broken, it needs to be answered with a counter chant. It's beautifully, elegantly simple. For the next hour, Rossweiss worked. A whirlwind of arcane energy and excited academic chatter. She had Naruto anchor her to the world's natural energy through his sage mode. She had Rias and Akino provide raw, controlled magical power. With Asia to heal the mental strain and Kaneko to stand guard, it was their first true team effort. Rossweiss wove their combined power into a complex counterspell, a new set of runes that met and harmonized with the door's endless loop. With a final, chiming chord of sound, the shifting runes locked into a single, static pattern. The shimmering faded, revealing a dark, open archway leading into the heart of the spire. They stepped inside. The interior was a cavernous, circular chamber, its walls lined not with books, but with thousands of glowing, crystalline shards, each one pulsing with a soft, internal light. In the center of the room was a single, massive crystal, a flawless monolith that hummed with ancient power. As they approached, the central crystal flared to life. Images, holographic and ethereal, began to project into the air above it. They saw the birth of Ethelgerd, not from a chaotic god, but from a precise, calculated act of creation by beings of immense light. They saw it was designed as a sanctuary, a backup reality. Then they saw the arrival of the enemy. It wasn't a conquering army, but a formless, creeping static, a patch of pure entropy that began to consume the stars at the edge of this reality. It was Malachor, the cosmic error, the virus in the divine machine. The projection showed the creators' desperate last act. Why couldn't delete the virus without destroying the whole system, so they built a firewall. A defense mechanism, an immune response. They called it the system. And as the creators' light faded, they activated its final, desperate protocol. The image of a single figure, blazing with golden energy, appeared. Beneath it, a line of crystalline text, cold and absolute, burned itself into their minds. Final Safeguard Protocol. Player, summon. The image shifted, showing their own faces, one by one. Peerage assets summoned to support player. Then, the final, chilling revelation. The crystal displayed the system's core directive. Its one and only goal. System Prime Objective. Neutralize entropic corruption. Preserve world code integrity. Addendum. Player and peerage assets are expendable. The survival of the system is absolute. The projection faded, leaving them in the silent, humming chamber. The truth of their existence in this world was laid bare. They were not chosen heroes on a grand quest. They were antibodies. They were tools. And they were utterly, completely disposable. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Siege of Silence. The revelation in the spire of scribes settled over them like a funeral shroud. They stood in the humming, crystalline chamber, the system's final, chilling addendum echoing in the silence. Expendable assets. The words were a cold negation of everything they had fought for. Every drop of blood they had shed. So that's it, Akeno said, her voice hollow. We're just tools, pawns in a cosmic game, to be sacrificed when we're no longer useful. The logic is sound, Rosweiss murmured, adjusting her glasses, though her academic detachment was clearly shaken. From a purely systemic standpoint, the preservation of the whole outweighs the fate of the individual components. It's ruthless, but efficient. It is unacceptable, Rias countered, her fists clenched, her crimson aura flaring with defiant rage. I am Rias Grimori. I am not an asset. I am not expendable. Asia looked at Naruto, her eyes filled with a deep, empathic sorrow for the weight he now carried. Kaneko simply moved to stand a little closer to him, a small, silent gesture of solidarity. All eyes turned to their leader. Naruto stood staring at the faded projection, his face unreadable. He had been a tool before, a Jinchuriki, a weapon for his village. He had fought his entire life to be seen as a person. Now, an entire world's operating system had branded him as a disposable component. He finally turned to face them, and the despair they expected to see in his eyes wasn't there. Instead, there was a familiar, stubborn fire. The system can think whatever it wants, he said, his voice quiet but ringing with unshakable conviction. It's wrong. He met each of their gazes. It brought us here, yeah, but it doesn't own us. We're not fighting because it told us to. We're fighting for the people in Oakhaven. We're fighting for Kalen and his warriors. We're fighting for the home we're building in the stone marches. He took a step closer, his presence a warm, grounding force in the cold, ancient chamber. We're not assets. We're a team, a family, and we're going to save this world not because some system ordered us to, but because it's our home now. Our mission is our own. That's all that matters. His words, simple and direct, cut through the existential dread. He wasn't denying the truth they had learned, he was rendering it irrelevant. Their purpose wasn't derived from the system, it was forged in the bonds they had made. A slow smile touched Akeno's lips. Rias's tense shoulders relaxed. Their resolve, once shaken, was now tempered into something harder and more personal than ever before. Their return to Stonehold was a jarring descent from the heights of metaphysical crisis to the grim reality of war. They arrived to find the fortress in a state of frantic preparation. A royal messenger, his horse dead from exhaustion and his own body failing, had arrived an hour earlier, bearing the king's personal seal and a desperate plea. While they had been seeking answers in the mountains, Malachor had moved. The Silent Herald, the god's chief general and an entity of immense power, had launched a full-scale invasion of Lyria. The royal army, still in disarray after the Whispering Choir's coup, had been shattered. The city's outer defenses had fallen in a matter of hours. The capital was burning, and the king and what remained of his forces were making a last, desperate stand within the palace walls. Lyria would not survive the night. This was its plan all along, Rias surmised, her voice tight with fury. The cult, the assassination attempt, it was all to weaken the capital, to leave it vulnerable for this single, overwhelming strike. We have to go, Naruto said without hesitation. Kalen, gather your best warriors. We ride in 10 minutes. My men are yours, My lord, the warlord boomed. But we are 500 against a legion that broke the royal army. Then we'll need more than 500, Naruto said, his eyes distant, a desperate, insane plan forming in his mind. He turned to Rosweiss. Can you send a message? A magical projection, one that can't be easily ignored. Moments later, in a fortified, hidden encampment miles to the west, Commander Valerius was reviewing a report on the strange energy signature from the northern mountains when the air in his command tent shimmered. The projection of Naruto Uzumaki, clad in his sage mode cloak, appeared before him. The Vidian knights in the tent immediately drew their swords. Hold, Valerius commanded, his eyes narrowed. Valerius, the projection of Naruto said, his voice calm and urgent. Lyria is falling, not to men, but to the army of the god of silence. I know what Malachor is now. He's not a god of this world. He's a virus from outside of reality, and his only goal is to erase everything. Your order, your kingdom, all of it. Your point, anomaly? Valerius asked, his voice cold. My point is that while we're fighting each other, the real enemy is winning. I'm going to Lyria to stop the Silent Herald. You can sit here in your camp and cling to rules while the world dies around you, or you can fight for the world you claim to protect. The choice is yours. The projection faded, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Valerius stood motionless for a long moment, the two halves of his mandate at war within him. Finally, he turned to his second in command. Sound the horns, he commanded, his voice like stone. The crusade is postponed. We march on Lyria. The ride to Lyria was a desperate, high-speed race against time. Naruto, his peerage, and Kalen's 500 warriors pushed themselves to the limit, a small, defiant force against an apocalyptic tide. They arrived to a scene from a nightmare. The proud, white walls of the capital were breached and burning. The sounds of battle were a chaotic din, but overlaying it all was the oppressive, soul-dampening aura of the Silent Legion. Then, from the west, came the sound of 1,000 war horns. A river of green and silver crested the hill, Commander Valerius and the Vidian Order, marching in perfect, terrifying formation. They didn't pause. They didn't confer. They simply lowered their lances and charged into the flank of the besieging army, a holy, disciplined hammer crushing the chaotic ranks of the legion. Naruto grinned, a fierce, wild thing. That's our cue. Let's go. Their arrival was the second wave of the tsunami, a surge of impossible power that smashed into the legion's rear. The battle for Lyria had begun. What followed was a masterclass in controlled chaos, a citywide battle where every member of Naruto's peerage became a legend. Rias and Akeno took to the skies. No longer constrained by the Order's dampening field, they were a terrifying symphony of destruction and light. Rias's crimson streams of power blasted entire battalions of Grawlers from the city walls, while Akeno's holy lightning rained down in golden torrents, purging the wraith-like creatures that swarmed the high towers. They were the Red Dragon and the Lightning Priestess, a CGHT of terrible beauty that rallied the hearts of the city's desperate defenders. At the shattered main gate, a monstrous behemoth, a creature of stitched-together corpses and silent magic, was on the verge of breaking through the last line of royal guards. Kalen, roaring a challenge, met its charge head-on, his massive maul clashing with its bone-like claws. Just as he was about to be overwhelmed, a white-haired comet slammed into the creature's side. Kaneko, her face set in a mask of grim determination, began a brutal, close-quarters brawl with the monster, her small fist striking with the force of siege engines. Kalen would create an opening, and Kaneko would exploit it, a tag team of brute force that held the gate against impossible odds. In the heart of the city, at the steps of the Grand Cathedral, a different kind of battle was being waged. Rosweiss, a Valkyrie in her element, erected massive, complex runic circles that pulsed with protective energy, creating a fortified safe zone. Within it, Asia was a whirlwind of green light. She performed mass healings, her gentle power washing over the wounded soldiers, royal guards, Kalen's men, and even Vidian knights, mending flesh and restoring hope. Together, the Valkyrie and the nun were protecting the city's soul. Naruto and Valerius, meanwhile, formed the spearhead, a tense but devastatingly effective duo. They carved a path through the blackened streets towards the royal palace, the epicenter of the herald's power. Valerius fought with a cold, holy precision, his new sword binding enemies in chains of light. Naruto followed, his Rasengan obliterating the creatures Valerius trapped. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were two sides of the same coin, fighting with a synergy born of mutual, hard-won respect. They reached the throne room to find it defiled. The grand chamber was pulsating with black energy, the walls covered in writhing, silent runes. King Theron and his last surviving royal guards were huddled behind the throne, their life force being visibly drained. And in the center of the room stood the silent herald. It was a tall, androgynous figure clad in flowing black robes made of solidified shadow. It had no face, only a smooth, porcelain-white mask. It held a staff topped with a black crystal that pulsed in time with the draining runes. The player, its voice echoed in their minds. A sound of grating static and chilling calm. And the broken warden. You are too late. The choir is already at its crescendo. Valerius charged, his sword ablaze with holy light. The herald simply raised one hand, and a wall of solid silence erupted from the floor, stopping the commander cold. Naruto shot past him. This one's mine. The duel was a battle of concepts. The herald didn't just fight, it warped reality. It turned the floor to a grasping pit of shadows, summoned lances of silent energy, and projected illusions of Naruto's deepest fears, his friends, dying one by one. But Naruto, empowered by Sage Mode and the Iron Will forged in the spire, pushed through it all. He was faster than shadow, his will stronger than any illusion. He saw his opening. The herald was channeling the life force of the king and his men into the crystal on its staff. It was a conduit. Naruto created two clones. One drew the herald's attack, while the other launched him into the air. He formed the most powerful Rasenshuriken he could muster, the shriek of the wind-infused chakra a direct violation of the herald's silent power. This world is not yours to erase. Naruto roared, flinging the attack. The wind-style Rasenshuriken struck the herald's staff. The black crystal cracked, then shattered, releasing the stolen life force in an explosive wave of energy. The herald itself was caught in the vortex of a million microscopic wind blades, its shadowy form being shredded on a cellular level. Naruto landed, panting, as the herald's form dissolved. Valerius shattered the wall of silence and rushed to the now recovering king. They had won, but as the last shadows of the herald faded, its voice echoed one last time in Naruto's mind, laced with a triumphant, cosmic amusement. Clever player. You destroyed the amplifier, but you failed to understand the song. This invasion, my death, it was never a conquest. It was a sacrifice. The energy of every soul lost today, legion and human alike, has been gathered. My demise is the final key. Naruto's eyes widened in horror. He looked up. Through the shattered ceiling of the throne room, he saw the sky above Lyria tear open. The clouds pulled back into a swirling, silent vortex of pure blackness, an abyss of anti-existence opening like a wound in the heavens. Battered and victorious, the heroes of Lyria, Rias, Akeno, Kaneko, Asia, Rosweiss, Kalen, and a stunned Valerius, gathered around Naruto in the ruined throne room. They followed his horrified gaze upward, their moment of triumph turning to ash in their mouths. The silent herald's final, psychic laugh echoed in all their minds. You have won the battle, heroes. But you have just started the real war. He is coming. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The God of Nothing and the Will of Fire. There was no victory cheer. The defeat of the silent herald and the rout of his legion had been rendered utterly meaningless by the horrifying spectacle that now consumed the sky. The swirling, silent vortex above Lyria was a wound in the fabric of reality, a drain pulling all warmth, color, and hope from the world. The sounds of the recovering city below, the cries of the wounded, the shouted orders, the clang of weapons being collected, all seemed muted, distant, as if they were already echoes of a time that had passed. A chilling, conceptual cold radiated from the portal, a eeping numbness that was not of the body, but of the soul. Laughter died, tears froze, and the fierce joy of survival was replaced by a dull, gray apathy. It's an anchor, Rosweiss said, her voice strained. Her academic fascination replaced by sheer terror. She was looking at the vortex not with her eyes, but with her magical senses. Malachor is using it to pull his true form, his true concept, into this reality. When he is fully anchored, it won't be a battle. It will just be the end. He will override existence. Then we cut the anchor, Kalen growled, hefting his maul. We can't, Rias said, her gaze fixed on the abyss. The anchor isn't the vortex. The vortex is just the doorway. The anchor is on the other side. A grim understanding settled over the group. This battle could not be won from their side of the door. This is our fight, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked at Kalen, and then at Commander Valerius, who was staring at the vortex with the face of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. You too, your fight is here. Protect the city. Protect the people. Keep our home safe for us. Valerius looked at Naruto, at this anomaly, this player, who was about to lead a suicide mission into the heart of a void. For the first time, he saw not a threat, but the world's only hope. Come back alive, Uzumaki, he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. It was not a command, but a plea. Naruto gave them a final, confident grin, a beacon of light against the encroaching despair. He turned to his peerage, his family. Rias, Akeno, Kaneko, Asia, Rosweiss. They had all been summoned into this world, lost and alone. Now, they stood as one, ready to face its final enemy. Ready? He asked. Their answers were not in words, but in the looks on their faces. Rias's proud defiance, Akeno's dangerous smile, Kaneko's stoic resolve, Asia's fearful but unwavering faith, Rosweiss's determined courage. Let's go, Naruto said. And together, the six of them leapt into the sky, a streak of defiant color, and plunged directly into the silent, waiting maw of the vortex. The transition was not a physical sensation, but a conceptual one. They were not falling or flying. They simply were, and then they were not. They were in Malicor's domain. It was a realm of absolute non-existence. A perfect, featureless white void that stretched into infinity in all directions. There was no up or down, no ground or sky. There was no sound, no smell, no temperature. It was a blank page on which reality had not yet been written. Their own forms seemed muted, their colors less vibrant, their presence an intrusion on the sterile perfection of the nothingness. A form began to coalesce before them. It was not a creature of rage and shadow like his heralds. It was a tall, elegant figure clad in robes of pure white, its form vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, as if it were an idea that had not yet settled on a final shape. Its face was a smooth, serene mask, and its voice, when it spoke, was the calm, rational tone of a philosopher, resonating directly within their minds. Welcome, errant data, the being that was Malicor projected. The flawed variables. I have been observing you. Your struggles are fascinating. Such noise, such pointless, beautiful chaos. You fight so hard to preserve your suffering. We fight to preserve our lives, Rias retorted. Her power already gathering, though it felt sluggish and weak in this sterile environment. Your life is suffering, Malicor corrected gently. It is a cycle of desire, loss, pain, and fleeting joy that inevitably leads back to pain. I have seen countless worlds burn in the fires of their own emotion. I offer the only true cure. The only true peace. I offer silence. He did not attack. He simply extended his will. And one by one, he showed them the peace he offered. The void around Akeno shifted. She was in a sun-drenched garden. Her mother, Shuri, was there, laughing as she arranged flowers. Her father, Barakiel, his fallen angel wings spread proudly, embraced her mother with a love that was pure and unchallenged. Here, Akeno, Malicor whispered. A world without prejudice. A world where your family was never torn apart. A world where you are not a source of shame, but a symbol of love. Is this not peace? The vision shifted to Rias. She stood on a balcony overlooking a perfect, orderly city. There was no house of Grimoire, no duty, no arranged marriages. There was only her, free to choose her own path, her own love, her power a tool for her own desires, not a weight of lineage. Here, Rias, the god of nothing offered. A world of perfect freedom, without the chaos of expectation. Is this not peace? Kaneko found herself in a field of flowers, her sister Kuroka beside her, free and smiling. Her Nekomata powers a gift, not a curse. Asia saw a world without a single cry of pain, a gentle paradise where her healing was unneeded. Rosweiss stood in a library calm. containing the answer to every cosmic question, the perfect, infinite silence of absolute knowledge. Finally, Malachor turned his full, terrible compassion upon Naruto. The white void became the vibrant green of Konoha. He was a child, and his mother, Kushina, was hugging him, her red hair a curtain of warmth. His father, Minato, stood beside them, his hand on Naruto's head, his smile bright and proud. Jiraiya was there, laughing his booming laugh. Neji, Asuma, the third Hokage, all of them. Everyone he had lost. They were all there, a perfect, unbroken circle of love. Here, Naruto Uzumaki, Malachor whispered, his voice resonating with a terrible, seductive pity. The world you bled for. The family you never had. A world without loss, without the pain of sacrifice. Simply accept my silence, and this will be your reality. Forever. Is this not the only peace that matters? The temptation was an ocean, a crushing, absolute weight. It was everything he had ever wanted. A single tear traced its way down Naruto's cheek. But then, he looked past the perfect vision of his parents. He saw Rias, Akeno, and the others, each trapped in their own perfect, silent paradise. And he knew. No, he said, his voice a raw, grating sound in the perfect void. Why? Malachor asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in his tone. Why cling to the broken world, when a perfect one is offered? Because it isn't real, Naruto said, his voice growing stronger. He looked at the vision of his parents, his heart aching with love and loss. I would give anything to have them back. But the life I lived, the struggles, the pain, the loneliness, it made me who I am. It led me to Iruka-sensei, to Kakashi-sensei, to Team 7. It led me here, to them. One by one, the others began to stir, their wills ignited by his. My pain is mine, Akeno declared. The vision of her parents fading as tears streamed down her face. It taught me the value of the family I have now. I wouldn't trade that for a painless lie. I will define my own name, Rias stated, her crimson power flaring, burning away the illusion of perfect freedom. And I will do it alongside those who have earned my respect. My sister is gone, Kaneko said, her small voice unwavering. But I have found a new pride. A new family to protect. A world without pain is a world without compassion, Asia whispered, her hands clasped in prayer. Our scars are what allow us to heal others. Knowledge without context is just data. Rosweiss proclaimed, shattering the infinite library. I would rather solve one real problem with my friends than know the answer to everything, alone. They came to stand with Naruto, a small, vibrant island of chaotic, emotional life in Malachor's sea of silent perfection. Their bonds, their shared pain and joy, were a shield the god of nothing could not pierce. Malachor's serene mask finally cracked. The philosophical calm was replaced by a chilling, divine frustration. So be it. If you will not accept the gift of silence, then you will be corrected. I will erase the flawed data you call a soul. The void around them compressed. The white nothingness turned into a crushing pressure of pure entropy. Reality itself began to fray at their edges. Their forms flickering as Malachor began the process of unmaking them. Akeno's wings dissolved into static. Rias's power was smothered. Kaneko's defense was bypassed. They were being deleted. Naruto watched his friends, his family, being erased before his eyes. A primal, world-shattering roar of pure, absolute defiance tore from his soul. It was not a plea for power. It was a command. He poured everything he was. His love for his friends, his promise to this new world, his unbreakable will to protect, into one, final, desperate surge. He didn't just ask for strength. He annulled the very concept they represented. Life, connection, noise. The system, the defense mechanism of a world on the brink of erasure, responded to this ultimate expression of its core purpose. Life defying the void, player and peerage have achieved perfect synergy of will. Conceptual opposition to entropy has reached critical threshold. Unlocking final safeguard protocol. Guardian Ascension. A torrent of golden white light erupted from Naruto. It was not just chakra or natural energy. It was the combined will of his peerage, the very life force of the world he was defending, all focused through him. His hair bleached to a shining white, his eyes turned a brilliant gold, and his body was wreathed in a fluid, incandescent cloak of pure energy, etched with the runic symbols of his companion's powers. He was no longer just a shinobi. He was the world's will to live, made manifest. Impossible. Malachor projected, his calm finally breaking into something akin to fear. A flaw in the code cannot rewrite the program. We're not a flaw. Naruto's voice boomed, layered with the voices of his friends, a chorus of defiance. We're the update. He raised his hand. A sphere of energy formed in his palm. It was not a Rasengan. It was a miniature sun, a swirling galaxy of every color, every emotion, every memory of their journey together. It was the chaos of life compressed into a single point. He thrust his hand forward. This is our answer, our noise, our will. The attack was not an explosion. It was a genesis, a new Big Bang. When the sphere of life struck the god of nothing, it did not destroy him. It overrode him. The perfect white void was flooded with color, with sound, with the chaotic, beautiful, painful reality of existence. Malachor's form screamed as it was forcible. Why filled with everything it sought to erase? Love, hate, joy, sorrow, life, and death. His concept was not annihilated, it was rendered meaningless. The entity that was Malachor was expelled, cast out from Ethelgerd's reality. Its anchor severed, its connection broken. The void collapsed, and the vortex above Lyria imploded, sealing itself with a final, silent thunderclap. The six of them fell from the sky, their energy spent, and landed gently in the ruined throne room, cushioned by a final whisper of Rosweiss's magic. They were battered, exhausted to their very souls, but they were alive. And they were together. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, the city of Lyria, for the first time in a long time, was truly quiet. Not the oppressive silence of Malachor, but the quiet of peace, of a long night finally over. Naruto stood on a high tower with his peerage, watching as Kalen's warriors and Valerius's knights worked side by side below, clearing rubble and tending to the wounded. The world was scarred, but it would heal. A final, simple line of text appeared in his vision, clear and bright in the morning sun. Objective complete. Guardian protocol active. Closing square bracket. The system was no longer giving orders. It was stating a fact. His role, their role, was no longer a command to be followed, but a truth to be lived. He looked at Rias, at Akino, at Kaneko, at Asia, at Rosweiss, his expendable assets, his found family. Their journey had ended, and their future had just begun. Chapter 10 End.